I'm pleased to announce that for the first time in 2 years since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we are able to welcome members of our Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps program to participate in our regular monthly board meeting. Cadet Kayla McCarthy will lead the Pledge of Allegiance and the pledge to the Texas flag. Cadet McCarthy attends North Forest High School in District 2. I would like to ask District 2 Trustee Kathy Bluford-Daniels to introduce the pledge leader.
Thank you. Cadet Master Chief Petty Officer Kayla McCarthy serves as the Acting Commanding Officer for the North Forest High School Navy Junior ROTC Unit. She ranks 20th in her 22 graduating class of 195 while maintaining a 3.8 grade average. Cadet McCarthy has displayed exceptional leadership skills and has distinguished herself by serving as a member and leader of the National Honor Society, Student Council, prom committees, and varsity softball team. She also has served as the drill team commander. Cadet McCarthy has been accepted into 5 Texas universities. After graduation, she plans to play collegiate softball and attain her 4-year degree in theater arts with a minor in business. Cadet Master Chief Petty Officer Kaylee McCarthy.
Thank you. Please join for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Texas Pledge. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge of allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Cadet McCarthy, and congratulations on all of your accomplishments. April 18th through 22nd is Volunteers in Public Schools Recognition Week. I'd like to ask Trustee Kathy Bluford-Daniels to read our proclamation in honor of this event. Trustee Bluford-Daniels.
Thank you, Madam President. Whereas every year, thousands of parents, businesses, community partners support students and teachers in the Houston Independent School District, HISD, by donating their time, resources, and knowledge, and whereas these volunteers serve in a variety of roles in areas such as mentoring, tutoring, extracurricular activities, office and classroom assistance, and more, with the goal of increasing student achievement, and whereas volunteers help in schools, programs, and events throughout Houston, and whereas a robust and successful education system requires community engagement and participation, and volunteers selflessly illustrate the power of that partnership, and whereas the National Public School Volunteer Week is observed April 18th through the 22nd, 2022. Now, therefore, we, the Houston Independent School District Board of Education and Superintendent of Schools, proclaim April 18th through 22nd, 2022 Volunteers in Public Schools Recognition Week in HISD in honor of thousands of active volunteers, and encourage all to express appreciation for these dedicated supporters who assist and enrich the lives of our students and teachers. In witness thereof, on this 14th day of April 2022.
April is Arab American Heritage Month. I'd like to ask Trustee Kendall Baker to read our proclamation in honor of this event. Trustee Baker.
Thank you, Madam President. Whereas for over a century, Arab Americans have been making valuable contributions in virtually every aspect of American society, in medicine, law, business, education, technology, government, military service, and culture, And whereas since immigrating to America, men and women of Arab descent have shared their vibrant cultures and traditions with neighborhoods, friends, while also setting fine examples of model citizens and public servants. And whereas they brought with them to America their resilient family values, strong work ethics, dedication to education, and diversity in faith and creed that have added strength to our great democracy. And whereas Arab Americans have also enriched our society by sharing in the entrepreneurial American spirit that makes our nation free and prosperous. And whereas they join all Americans in the desire to see a peaceful and diverse society in which every individual is treated equally and feels safe. Now, therefore, we, the Board of Education, and the Superintendent of Schools of the Houston Independent School District do hereby proclaim April 22nd, Arab American Heritage Month in HISD. And we encourage all to join in this observance to celebrate the rich traditions of the Arab American culture, if witness thereof on this 14th day of April 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Baker and Trustee Bluford Daniels. Please note that we are conducting our hearing of the community in two parts to prioritize our students who have signed up to speak. We have 3 student speakers who shall be limited to 1 minute each. They have all registered to speak via Zoom. Students, please remember that we must see you live with your camera on as you speak. If you are watching the meeting live on another device, please mute the meeting audio when you speak to avoid audio interference. Turn on your camera and begin speaking. Ms. Trin, please identify and admit our speakers.
Our first speaker is Angelique Sanchez. Angelique, go ahead and turn on your video, and you may begin.
Hi, as a student and advocate for climate activism, I would first like to thank everyone at HISD who is helping make a change in the process of eliminating styrofoam from the cafeteria. I hope that everyone who promised a change will commit and see through to this cause to make a future school in HISD more environmentally friendly. For the younger generation, like my 4-year-old sister, who will have to not live in fear of contributing to the extinction and killing of many animals due to climate change or the harmful chemicals in styrofoam. While this is just the first step, I would like to bring to attention to the board another change that can be done. There has been an alarming amount of plastic water bottle waste and reports of high lead testing in regular drinking water fountains. To combat both problems, a refillable water station like those used in the University of Houston, the UH2O, should be implemented. This will help both problems since the hydration stations have filter and colors to know when to change and clean them, and will encourage kids to use reusable water bottles instead of decrease the plastic water bottles. I hope I was able to bring this issue to light and ask for the board members and those in HISD to keep these issues in mind. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bella Carla. Bella, you may begin. Please turn on your camera so that we can see you.
Hello, board members. My name is Bella Culver, and I'm a 7th grader from Lanier Middle School. I would like to thank you all so much for beginning the process of switching to a greener solution in place of styrofoam trays. Houston has recently been named one of the first UNICEF child-friendly cities. This means we need to keep our children safe, and the best way to do this is to reduce our carbon footprint. Schools in the U.S. go through more than 5 billion styrofoam lunch trays a year. These trays are made of petroleum, a non-sustainable and high-polluting resource. Plus, they contribute to the 270 million tons of plastic pollution in our oceans. We use one styrofoam lunch tray for approximately 30 minutes, but each leaves a trail of toxic styrene particles that will last forever. As the 8th largest school district in America, HISD's act of abolishing styrofoam trays will inspire other school districts to do the same, creating a more eco-friendly planet. Plus, Dallas and Austin ISD has already removed styrofoam trays from their schools' cafeterias, and it's time we follow in their footsteps. At Lanier Middle School, our environmental club has already applied for a grant to implement a recycling program to our school. We've run into some obstacles, but we know even though it's been a challenging process, it will help create a more sustainable community. Thank you, trustees, for taking the time to listen to our stories. Please continue to see this issue through because we only have one planet, and these small changes can transform our future. Thank you.
Our next student speaker is Abigail Espiritu. Abigail, please turn on your camera and you may begin. Abigail, please turn on your camera and you may begin. Abigail, I'm sorry, but we cannot hear you. Can you check your speaker one more time? It's okay. We can see you, but we still cannot hear you. No, sweetie, we can still see you, but we cannot hear you. Madam President, that was the last student. Oh, let's try one more time. Abigail, we're going to try to come back to you later on in the meeting, okay? Madam President, that was the last student speaker for this section.
Thank you, Ms. Trin. It's now time to hear from speakers to specific agenda items. We have 27 speakers registered this evening who shall be limited to 1 minute each per board policy. Please speak to the agenda item you have signed up for. We also ask that speakers stay on topic and refrain from naming individuals, especially students, as their identity is protected under law, but you may name your own child. While the board listens to concerns of a general nature, speakers should practice normal rules of decorum. Obscene language and profanity will not be tolerated as this is a public meeting and our students are watching. Additionally, disruptions of the meeting will not be tolerated. We ask the audience to refrain from interrupting speakers while they present to the board during this portion of the meeting and to promptly end their remarks when the timer rings, indicating the expiration of their time. Speakers will generally be given 2 reminders of our public comment rules. If the speaker continues to violate the rules after these reminders, the speaker will be asked to leave the meeting. Our first item held for registered speakers is discussion regarding 2022-2023 budget alternatives presented on April 7th, 2022. Will Crystal Moretz please come to the podium? Ms. Moretz is also registered for item A2. As I call the next 3 names, please take a seat on the front row. Linda Sandos Robinson, Ruth Kravitz, and Sung.
Hello, my name is Crystal Morales, a senior at Northside High School. This year may be my last, but I still wish for change. I missed some important educational experiences because of the district's overemphasis on the STAR test. Although I had an amazing science teacher, I did not have the privilege of doing hands-on experiments in my biology class. We were so busy practicing for STAR. I was privileged enough to have an excellent reading teacher who allowed me to read novels rather than STAR passages. Because of this, I grew in my learning without being limited to STAR multiple choice questions. Many students don't have that opportunity. We should be spending less money on STAR. When we enforce the STAR curriculum, students learn how to be robots. Students are not allowed the creativity to learn in our own ways. Our education is limited to learning how to pass a test. Instead, we should be funding educational field trips and science labs. allowing us to experience and interact with our learning. Thank you.
Linda Sendos Robinson, Ruth Kravitz, Ann Sung, Ann First.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Sandage Robinson. I'm a former attorney and a retired educator, having served as a middle school English and reading teacher, as well as an elementary school librarian. I strongly support a librarian in every school. I loved my library work, but I can unequivocally state that I could never have fulfilled the position's duties had it not been for my supervisor, the campus instructional specialist, who was also a certified librarian. He trained me from that first day and throughout my first year. In effect, I served as his apprentice, and I will always be grateful. I was in a unique position to work with a certified librarian administrator who provided me with one-on-one training. But this is decidedly not the norm. I believe the best way to provide library professionals to all our schools is by reinstating HISD's ACP program for certified librarians and establishing a 3-year timeline of recruiting and training classroom teachers for the librarian.
Ruth Kravitz, Ann Sung, Ann First.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity. In HISD's PUA model, school funding is currently tied to attendance, but in most Texas school districts, funding is tied to enrollment. How is this an equity problem? Let's think about a school where students don't have a coat in winter and whose families may not have a car to drive to school when it's raining, whose families are less likely to have health insurance, so when their children are sick, they're sick longer. Older children may have to stay home with sick siblings. These are some of the things that negatively impact the attendance rate and therefore funding. Let's look at 2 schools with the same enrollment, each with, say, $2 million in a budget. The school with a 90% attendance rate would receive about $200,000 less than the school with an attendance rate closer to 100%. An attendance-based model bakes in a poverty penalty. If we're going to use a PUA model, let's make it more equitable and instead tie funding to enrollment. Do the reverse. Thank you so much.
Ann Sung, Ann First.
Superintendent, honored trustees, I speak tonight to urge you to address 2 long-standing inequities in HISD funding. In 2011, the Department of Education study identified HISD as one of the most inequitable districts in the country, spending less per student at Title I campuses than at non-Title I campuses. In 2019, a HERC study found that schools with a higher proportion of economically disadvantaged students had lower per student spending. How does this happen? HISD's current funding model does have weights, giving an additional 10% to students labeled economically disadvantaged, for example. That's equitable. On the other hand, HISD takes away funding from schools with its attendance multiplier. Poverty affects attendance. That's inequitable. Also inequitable, HISD charges schools for teachers' average salary, not their actual salary, which, to quote the DOE, masks the fact that schools serving disadvantaged students often have less experienced teachers who are paid less. Altogether, that tips us towards inequity.
Ann First.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Furs. I'm here today to ask you to make it easier for our teachers to become school librarians. Many HISD teachers want to be librarians. It's an interesting and rewarding job. But because HISD has lost more than 200 librarians over the past 20 years, until now, it hasn't made sense for teachers to become certified. Right now, certification is not easy to get. Only 5 programs are TEA approved for Houston teachers. They cost more than $10,000, and they take 2 years to earn during the school year, not in the summer. There seems to be no financial aid to help teachers with this training. Please help clear this career pathway for our teachers. In the past, HISD offered school librarian alternative certification program to encourage teachers to gain the skills that they need to manage effective libraries that students and teachers want and need.
Next, we will hear from registered speakers who signed up to speak virtually via Zoom regarding this item. Again, please remember that we must see you live with your camera on as you speak. If you are watching the meeting live on another device, please mute the meeting audio when you speak to avoid audio interference. Turn on your camera and begin speaking. Ms. Trin, please identify and admit our speakers.
Our next speaker is Jesse Heiner. Jesse, you may begin. Please turn on your camera. Jesse Heiner, you are on. Please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Audio interference. Turn on your camera and begin speaking. Identify and admit our speaker.
Our next speaker is John Seagren. John, please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Board members, thank you for your time. I teach at North Houston Early College High School, where I sponsor our Climate Activism Club. My students and I have spoken for a few months about the damage that styrofoam lunch trays do to the environment, and we are pleased that HISD Nutritional Services has begun the procurement process for environmentally friendly trays. My students and I know these processes can take time, but we also want to see it through, and I urge all board members to advocate for a switch as soon as possible. One of my students created a petition asking HISD to switch away from styrofoam trays, and the petition has close to 600 signatures, more than our entire campus body. This shows that there is community support for the transition, so let's make the switch happen. Betty Wiggins from Nutritional Services has also asked from our student group to bring up the topic of plastic bottle waste in HISD. If you had to guess, how many plastic bottles would you say our school district throws away in a day? The answer floored me. Our district goes through 100,000 plastic bottles every day. It doesn't have to be this way. Let's install refillable water stations on campuses, which would encourage students to bring their own water bottles. Let's get innovative about the way we encourage students and staff to consider how much they waste and create a more sustainable future. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Allison Newport. Allison, please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Good evening, Trustee and Superintendent. My name is Allison Newport, and I'm a parent at St. Clair Elementary. I encourage you to continue your efforts to more equitably fund our schools and level the playing field. A necessary first step is to shift away from attendance-based funding to enrollment-based funding. This is an ideal compromise that the community should support. Equitable funding of all schools based on enrollment is an essential change for our district, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Patrick Ryan. Patrick, please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Thank you. Hello, distinguished members of the HISD School Board. McNamara Elementary has over 1,000 students, 700 of which speak limited or no English. Over 20 languages are spoken at McNamara with an average of 7 languages in each classroom. More than 20 classrooms are above 22 students, and 9 of these classes have 25 to 30 students. The projections in the staffing model form that was posted online had a projection of 911 students for the next school year. McNamara had an influx of about 180 refugee students this year. According to Houston Welcomes Refugees, these refugees tend to stay in the same area for 3 to 7 years before they start moving out of the area. So McNamara was underprojected by about 100 students. This will cause the school to lose 7 teachers, 2 teacher specialists, and 2 clerks. HISD is saying that equity is a priority. While refugees have more needs to be met than the average student, linguistic needs, financial needs, and emotional needs, McNamara needs to hire more staff and get more books, dictionaries, and materials that these refugee parents cannot afford to provide. This cannot be done with cuts in teachers and in the budget. McNamara needs more temporary buildings. They had to turn the library into 2 classrooms, and the stage is now the computer lab. Refugee facts. Refugees do not get to pick refugee status. They cannot apply.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jesse Heiner. Jesse, please turn on your camera and you may begin. Jesse Heiner, you've joined the meeting, but please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead and begin, please.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jessie Heiner, and I am a member of the SDMC at Wainwright Elementary, where 92% of the students receive free or reduced lunch. Wainwright has not had consistent leadership for 3 years. We are now on our 4th principal in 3 years, and we haven't had a permanent AP for this entire school year. This would never have happened at a school where the majority of students' parents have stable income levels and resources that allow them to advocate for their schools. It is important to me that you understand the harm that an inequitable budget and inequitable decision-making brings to Wainwright and other schools like it. Our past experience with HISD's budget has left schools competing against each other and leaving the low-income schools like Wainwright fighting for scraps. I want HISD to create a budget where there is as much leadership and teacher stability at low-income schools as there are at affluent schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam President, those are all the speakers for this section.
Thank you. Our next item held for registered speakers is A2, Acceptance of Board Monitoring Update, Presentation of Goal 2, Progress Measures 1, 2, and 3. Will Karina Quesada please come to the podium?
So all this constant talk about student achievement and student outcomes, well, let me tell you about some very real consequences as a result of these board goals that focus solely on STAR. My eldest is in the 9th grade, and up until April 5th, hadn't read one single book in his English class. They didn't read any books because they were preparing for the STAR test. Where is that slide on these presentations? Where does the not reading books fall into the college and career readiness category? And moving him into a dual credit or AP classes doesn't solve the systemic problem. What about the other kids in his class, in his school, and all across the district who are in regular classes? Do they not deserve to read books? Do they not deserve an education? Our tax dollars go to funding public education, and that means educating everyone, not just the kids deemed worthy. You give everyone the same test, but not the same quality education. For shame.
Our next item held for registered speakers is B1, Completion and Approval of the Board's Quarterly Self-Evaluation and Review of the Board's Staff Use Tracker. Will Dr. Candace Matthews please come to the podium? And will Mr. Gary Monroe please take a seat on the front row? Dr. Candace Matthews? Gary Monroe?
My attorney told me to deliver a message. If you cut me off tonight, you're getting sued in the morning. Bet you won't do it. I can't be mad at him. Minus the 2 new trustees, did anybody vet this man? I had an opportunity to speak with a bunch of people from Clarksville, Tennessee this week. They glad he gone. You ain't make no scores go up. They were already high performing. The community is so upset to the point that clergy, remember the pastor with the big church? He glad you're gone too. Why? Because you turned your back on the African American community. You didn't care nothing about their kids, nothing. How you hire a man that ain't never dealt with our type of kids? He's a scam artist, and the remix to Mr. Superintendent comes out Monday. You're welcome to the video shoot next week.
Our next item held for registered speakers is C3 Real Estate. Will Travis McGee please come to the podium? Mr. McGee is also registered to J1 in the hearing of the community. Travis McGee. Our next item held for registered speakers is F1 Adoption of Resolution to convene Local School Health Advisory Council for the purpose of making recommendations regarding curriculum materials for the school's district human sexuality instruction and instruction on the prevention of child abuse, family violence, dating violence, and sex trafficking. Will Jackie Abreu Hill please come to the podium? The speaker is also registered to I4. As I call the next three names, please take a seat on the front row. Richard Calderon, Win Chow, Laura Lim.
Good evening. I never thought pornographic and obscene books would be considered a political issue. This is not a right-wing operative to go after and attack the left or LGBT community. We are not Nazis who want to burn books. I find that highly offensive. We are parents and taxpayers who, in our moral compass, see the sexual ideologies that are in our schools, and we are not okay with this being available to our kids. We are being forced to accept ideologies that don't align with our beliefs, yet no one respects our values. The party of love and acceptance only applies to those who think like them. When we oppose, it becomes a political issue. And none of you are looking at me, so that's great. Our children can still read so many great books that don't encourage sex, gender transformations, racial divide, and even witchcraft. We don't have to agree on all topics, but we should agree what's best for our kids. The parents come first when making these decisions. We can agree on one thing: remove the pornographic books. The rest comes later, that we can.
Richard Calderon, Win Chow, Laura Lim, Travis McGee. Richard Calderon, Win Chow.
Just a moment, please. Okay. Board members, there are in fact pornographic and explicit books in our public libraries in HISD that are geared toward grooming our students' young minds. Our students are failing school, but instead of focusing on curriculum, our district is secretly bringing in inappropriate material and filling our libraries with them. I'm going to read an excerpt of Looking for Alaska. Books like this have been checked out to students in various HISD libraries, and they need to be removed. If you feel uncomfortable hearing it, then it is clear our students should not have it in their hands. Labeling something as queer or LGBTQ is not an excuse or even a reason to bring explicit or graphic text into our schools. Parents trust us to ensure proper education of these young minds each day, and it is abusive that these books are even in our district and in our libraries. It opened with a woman standing on the bridge with her legs spread while a guy knelt in front of her giving her oral sex. They don't just make sex look fun for women. This girl is just an object. Look at that. Have you ever given a blowjob before? Oh, I've never.
Please refrain from clapping. You can do ASL clapping, please. Laura Lim, Travis McGee.
So he held a bottle in one hand and penis in the other, hard, hot, veiny. He moved Esther's hand up and down, first slowly, then fastly. This penis hot and hard. The face contorted and Esther's hand was wet and hot and sticky. It had egg white on it. This book, called The God of Small Things, is currently in our high schools: Bel Air, Eastwood Academy, Kinder, Chavez, and Westside High School. Books like Flamer, which is currently in our middle and high schools like Hogg and Meyerland Middle School, and also on the Name That Book list. Students are required to put to memory quotes like this: "We're each busting a load in this bottle. If you don't come, you have to drink it. Have fun sucking each other's dicks, ladies." I don't know what in the world these books are relevant to the students and campus it serves. Rape, incest, and sex, the list goes on, would not save any child's life or is required for any child's learning. This is not a political issue. This is not a censorship issue. This is a morality issue. You want your children to read these books? Don't get it twisted that you can trash our kids' minds with sex through literature and then call it censorship when we deem the material inappropriate. Why are you so hell-bent on teaching?
That's the second warning for those clapping. Travis McGee.
Good evening. I ain't come to talk about that, but that is a damn shame, though.
if they have something like that in the books at our schools. We have 2 far more pressing issues than to come down here and talk about that. They shouldn't have to come down here and talk about that. But I'm talking about the conditions of schools that have closed in our area. They look like haunted houses now. And we want these buildings not to be sold to the highest bidder. We want them to be beneficial to people in our community. We want them to be accessible to our community. I've been preaching trades forever. We don't need them at the ACC. We need them back in these communities. In the past, you all have closed school after school after school after school after school. The bund has produced multi-million-dollar bunds. But we don't see that money. We don't see all that money. I find it kind of hard to believe that $300 million just pop up out of nowhere. Something wrong with that picture. About 6 to 8 years ago, they said inflation was up. Well, plywood is $50 a.
Next, we will hear from registered speakers who signed up to speak virtually via Zoom regarding this item. Oh, yes, go ahead.
HISD libraries are plagued with books that describe minors having sex, not only written, but also images of oral sex and naked adult men touching boys' genitals. We know this content is not appropriate or legal for minors to read. So what type of person has an interest in sexual content involving kids? We must ask ourselves, why is this school board allowing literature for pedophiles to be given to our children? We recently had Trustee Santos disgracefully saying that children reading inappropriate books is good because it opens the door to a child's inner world. Ma'am, I don't know what inner world you had as a child, but I do know that you do not belong in this school board. You belong to your father, the devil. Thanks.
Next, we will hear from registered speakers who signed up to speak virtually via Zoom regarding this item. Again, please remember that we must see you live with your camera on as you speak. If you are watching the meeting live on another device, please mute the meeting audio when you speak to avoid audio interference. Turn on your camera and begin speaking. Ms. Trinh, please identify and admit our speakers.
Our next speaker is Jana McEwen. Jana, please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Hello, can you see me or hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you yet.
Oh, hold on. I'm sorry, I apologize. Are we good?
Yes, you may begin.
Okay, I'm gonna be reading from the Jack of Hearts and Other Parts. It's a book that's in HIC libraries. I'd sucked my share of dicks and had gotten plenty of blowjobs, hand jobs, every kind of job, but the only butt sex I had was with this junior who was in love with my cock. Anyway, so the senior and I are having fun, kissing and sucking and 69ing and what have you. And then he says to me, I want to fuck that pretty little ass of yours. So he bends me over the bed and drizzles some lube on my ass. I make him wear a condom, of course. Eventually he finishes and pulls out, and the condom, of course, is covered in shit. Anyway, here's my advice to you. Make sure you want to do it because it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but it can be fun too. Even if you don't have a prostate, there are nerve endings and pressure. Just make sure you've taken a shit beforehand and cleaned after, preferably with soap and water in the shower, because if you got to go while he's inside you, it's going to come out gross. When you're ready to get fucked, use lots of lube. A finger first. Go slow. This book is in HISD high schools, even Long Academy, where children as young as 11 have access to it. Santos, at a previous board meeting, you said you were glad these books were in schools because our kids could bring them home. If our kids could bring them home to us, even better, it would open up dialogue and conversation. Wow. Then you go on social media and you mock us with the come and take it book meme. This is insane. Now, excuse me while I go pour bleach.
Our next speaker is Alexandria Warren. Alexandria, please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Hello, y'all. My name is Alexandria. I'm calling on behalf of Community Voices for Public Health. Public Education. I do a lot of other things. I'm a graduate of HISD schooling, and I just want to thank the board for allowing me to talk today. I would like to draw some attention to the issues in the F1 agenda item. Personally, me, myself, being a graduate of Carnegie Vanguard High School, shout out to Ms. Casperson, she allowed us to read The Color Purple within our classroom. It was a diverse class, but being of African-American heritage, all of my friends had seen the movie multiple times, and the amount of camaraderie we had between our classmates who had never really known our culture after reading that book and watching the movie. Having everyone in the class know the "until you do right by me" was incredibly helpful to our growth. I really do appreciate the diversity that she was trying to incorporate in our classrooms. And I just want to encourage the board to
Thank you, Madam President. Those are all the Zoom speakers for this section.
Thank you. Our next item held for registered speakers is I-1, approval of vendor awards for purchases over $100,000 and ratification of vendor awards for purchases under $100,000. Will Daniel Santos please come to the podium? And will Bernadette Ease please take a seat on the front row?
Good evening, members of the board. I rise to speak on item I-1. It is concerning that the metric selected to measure success of a $2 million investment in the Agile Minds math program is going to be not math scores, but student surveys about attitudes. What input did our math teachers have on this potential $2 million investment? We hope that this is not indicative of how the surplus of $300 million will be budgeted. We don't need more programs when the talent is already here. HISD has great talent, teachers and support staff who have soldiered through a pandemic to help our students. Restore respect and dignity, not to corporate programs, but to people's compensation. Invest more, not in programs, but in teachers and support staff. We will be watching. Thank you.
Bernadette Ease. Our next item held for registered speakers is I-4, approval of the April General Fund budget amendment. Will Angela Box please come to the podium? And will Hector Mireles please take a seat on the front row?
I'm Angela Box, and I'm a former HISD teacher. My pronouns are GFY. You wonder why there are so many resignations and why behavior is completely out of control? Here's why. Leftists say that everything is racist, including expecting civilized behavior. Newsflash, it is not racist to expect kids to sit still, pull up their pants, walk in a straight line, and to raise their hands to speak. It is not racist to instill discipline or to expect civilized and polite behavior. It is racist to say that black and brown children can't do these things because of cultural differences. Therefore, you are the racists. You reward habitual disruptors and punish children who want to learn, teachers who want to teach, and parents who want the best possible education for their kids, all in the name of critical race theory. You are obsessed with identity pronouns when the children you indoctrinate don't know the actual grammatical purpose of pronouns. You push a radical agenda to prepare students for clown world, not real world. Be scrapped. Lord,
Thank you, Ms.
deliver
Box.
us from evil.
Hector Mireles. Our last item held for registered speakers is J1, discussion of the redrawing of trustee district boundary lines and approval of related resolutions. Will Dr. Pamela Boveland please come to the podium? And Sister Mama Sonia Lucas Roberts, please take a seat on the front row. We have one speaker, Ashley Solano, registered to address this topic via Zoom. Ms. Trin, please admit Ms. Solano.
Madam President, Ms. Solano has not joined the Zoom call. She's not available.
Thank you. This concludes our hearing of registered speakers for agenda items. We are now ready to consider discussion and report items. Superintendent House, discussion regarding 2022-2023 budget alternatives presented on April 7th, 2022. Superintendent House, would you like to begin the discussion?
Thank you, Madam President. I would. Trustees, of course, last week, there we go. Last week we held a budget workshop where I had the opportunity to present an alternative school funding and staffing model that was aligned to also kind of what we saw in the hybrid model as well. Now I'd like to preference, before I get started with this conversation, that budget slides that you will see today have been updated in alignment with projections based on principal projections as well. So just want to make that clear, that alignment and that change was made. Given that it is the will of the board to move forward with this alternative model, today I'd like to revisit its major component and its impact on the budget, focusing primarily on the PUA. Because schools, of course, must plan and make important decisions around staffing and programming for the upcoming school year, it is imperative that we leave this meeting today with clarity around the direction we are headed in terms of how we fund our schools. Now, however, before we get into today's budget discussion, I'd like to directly address concerns raised in the media earlier this week regarding the increase in the district's fund balance over the course of the last 5 years. Given my concerns around the district's financial status when I first accepted this job, during the first few months of my superintendency, I ordered an audit of the district's financial practices from one of the top firms in the country. As you all have heard, Alvarez and Marsal has been in the mix with HISD, which has been a good thing. The intent, of course, of this audit was to get to the root of the district's budget issues and to help us develop a more efficient process and systems of the budget for the school district to move forward in a positive manner. Since their original audit in reference to Alvarez and Marsal was shared with you all, we've been working hand in hand with them to develop all of the budget presentations that you all have seen this year. Their support has been vital in helping my administration to ensure that every dollar is being utilized strategically to improve student outcomes. We want to assure the public that moving forward, that our budgeting process will strike the correct balance between fiscal responsibility and maximizing the use of taxpayer dollars to promote academic outcomes for kids as much as possible. Now, I'd like to start by revisiting the core components of the alternative model that we talked about during the last workshop. As I shared at that time, the alternative model has 4 main components, as you'll see here. It begins with maintaining our existing structure for resource distribution, which is a weighted funding to schools from our PUA formula or per unit allocation. The PUA weights and overall formula will not be changed for the upcoming school year. I want to make sure that we are clear on that. The PUA weights for the upcoming school year will not be changed, but we do plan on partnering with an outside organization to help us look at the PUA formula and examine if there are ways to improve it over the years to come. One of the areas we will also closely examine over the next year is enrollment-based versus attendance-based school funding. I understand that there are interests around this particular scenario in reference to funding from trustees to shift to an enrollment-based formula, but it's important for us to understand that there are pros and cons to doing so, and we must get some outside support to better understand this particular issue and the implications before moving in this direction. On top of the PUA that campuses receive, we will also be providing a more equitable distribution of ESSER and Title I funds to our high-need schools so that campuses have the financial resources to offer the core educational experience that we've described in our strategic commitments. Additionally, within our alternative model, we are going to require that campuses fund 3 essential positions, as we've talked about. These 3 positions are also ones that the community clearly communicated in our listen and learns as we went from school to school during the first 100 days. There are those specific positions are, of course, counselors, as we've talked about, or a social worker, either or, librarian or media specialists as well. So it's important that we understand that those particular positions are positions that will be required in this model to move forward. Lastly, I shared with you all last week that I'm extremely excited that HISD is joining the state's System of Great Schools network. Through this network, we'll receive support and resources as we develop a more aligned and strengthened accountability system over the next year. Next slide. I think it is extremely important as well to highlight the alternative model maintains the same proposed compensation package that I previously shared with the board when we were planning the hybrid model for allocating positions for funds to our schools. Now, the cost for year one of the three-year compensation plan has and remains incorporated into our budget projections for the upcoming fiscal year. As I've said before, we cannot afford to provide our employees with a competitive compensation package if we plan on attracting and retaining the level of talent that our students need. It's going to be important that we keep the compensation package cooked into what we're doing. Here again are some of the features of year one of the compensation package, just as a reminder. First, there's both a cost of living adjustment and a step increase for all teachers, which will raise the base salary of our average teacher today by nearly 7%. Second, there is an increase for principals, assistant principals, deans, that will make us a much more competitive school district, particularly at the elementary level, where we are the furthest behind in terms of pay. Finally, this plan provides raises for the wide range of support staff on our master pay table, which covers most of the support staff, including custodians, cafeteria workers, analysts, instructional specialists, and teaching assistants, just to name a few of those particular groups. The specific raise will vary by grade based on what we've learned through our marketing analysis and market comparisons. We look forward to getting budget approval that will allow us to implement this important upgrade to how we pay everyone in Team HISD. I also want to revisit the topic in reference to central office expenditures and remind you that my team is working on a plan to reduce central funded expenditures by $60 million to help with the cost of the compensation package as well. A few of you expressed concerns about central office allocations increasing by $91 million since 2018, and please know that we heard you. I want to provide some additional breakdown in reference to these increases. As you can see in this particular slide or chart, a majority of these increases have been directly covered services and resources for students and schools. The biggest financial increase were the expansion of special education services and wraparound services. It is critical to keep in mind that the central office budget includes much more than just people working at Hattie Mae. It includes bus drivers, it includes custodians, it includes schools, supports, teachers, special education services, and other types of supports and resources for students and schools. It is also extremely critical to keep in mind that the district cannot simply operate without the functions provided by central office. From processing, of course, paychecks on a monthly basis or biweekly basis to ensuring our email accounts work properly through IT, providing principals and with the kind of support and accountability that they need. We cannot overestimate the critical role that effective central office employees play on a daily basis. Now, I say all of this because it is extremely important to note that while I am targeting a $60 million reduction in central office expenditures for the upcoming school year, there is no way that we can afford it without impacting the services that I just talked about in our schools that of course directly touch students and employees. As I have shared in previous workshops, my team is working on a plan that will mitigate the impact of these central office cuts as much as possible. I look forward to sharing the detailed plan with the board and the public during subsequent upcoming budget workshops. Before I dive into the conversation around the impact the alternative model will have on the budget, I want to revisit the updated projected starting fund balance for this upcoming year. This is the same information I shared during last week's budget workshop. It shows that we projected to have a $298 million available fund balance. For those of the public who don't know what available fund balance is, it's essentially money that the district has saved above a required amount set by the board that can be utilized as the district sees fit. But another way to think about it is this is money that we have available to us above our district rainy day fund. This is the available unspent funding from years previous that my administration has taken a close look at, and that what you have seen in the media most recently. Again, shortly after coming to the district, I initiated a third-party audit of our finances because I wanted to understand how we got to this particular point and how we can improve our financial practices moving forward to ensure that we're being efficient in how we utilize our funding. As you will see in the next couple slides, our plan is to use part of this available funding to assist with our budget and deficit next year. So last week I shared the options listed on this particular chart for the PUA for the upcoming school year and their respective impacts on the budget deficit. I asked the board what your preference was, and all trustees who spoke at that particular time indicated that their preference is to increase the PUA to fully cover the costs associated with the compensation package increase. Unless the board indicates a different preference this evening, this is the option that we will pursue and will base our updated campus allocations on as we hopefully deliver those to schools at the end of this meeting. It is my intention to share the updated allocations again with principals ASAP and the public, which will be this evening as soon as we have a confirmed answer from each of you how we want to move forward. This means that we will face a projected deficit of about $117 million for the 22-23 school year. Again, this includes an employee compensation package that will cost about $82.7 million that is partially offset by a $60 million reduction in central office expenditures that I talked about, as shown in this particular chart as well. We will use $67 million of that $298 million fund balance that you've heard about most recently in the media to project to cover the deficit as well, and the remaining $50 million will come from our ESSER indirect cost fund. We are projected to still have a very healthy fund balance at the end of this next school year, but we must begin to make the kind of financial adjustments now, given that both, of course, ESSER and our available fund balances are not reoccurring revenue sources. So, as I've stressed in previous workshops, the budget challenges that my administration inherited were not built, of course, overnight, and thus won't be solved overnight either. However, they must be addressed, as we cannot rely on using available fund balance or ESSER indirect funds indefinitely. We must be financially responsible and get the district on solid financial ground. To move us in this direction, as I've already indicated, we're going to have to reduce central office expenditures again by $60 million for the 22-23 school year. Let me be clear and reiterate that this will have a direct impact on schools, staff, and students. We also will be working with experts and the community to develop a comprehensive plan that I will present commitment to the board in the upcoming school year that will get us to where we need to be financially as a school system. Now, it's going to take an extremely thoughtful and multi-year strategy, which will require many important and tough decisions in order to improve the district's financial situation. However, we know that these decisions will always put students first. We've talked about that over and over again, and we always want to put students first. It's important to do so, and it's necessary to ensure that high-quality education that we want and need for every single student that walks through the doors of an HISD building. Now, as I indicated earlier today, we plan on releasing our updated campus allocations to principals ASAP. For full transparency, we also want to do so for every campus allocation through the public as well, and we'll have a link so the public can see that. That link will be houstonisd.org/strategic plan. With these allocations, our schools will be able to make final plans for the next school year over the next weeks. Again, I will be sharing this information and overview as we plan to meet the targeted $60 million centralized expenditure reduction that I've talked about on 3 occasions now. And lastly, what I want to share in reference to this particular slide is that just a reminder that to everyone in the public, everyone in the boardroom, that we will be focused on developing a school performance framework and aligned accountability and tiered autonomy system that will begin to hopefully accelerate this summer and carry over into next spring. So looking ahead, as an FYI, we do have an upcoming budget workshop, which is scheduled for April the 21st, as you'll see. President Cruz, I'd like to turn it back over to you to see if there's any discussion.
Thank you so much, Superintendent House. And trustees, we're going to do one round of 2 minutes. This is not a budget workshop. This is an item so that Superintendent House can have clarity on whether or not we want to cut the PUA. So in your 2 minutes, if you would please include a statement on that, in addition to any questions that you have. So please indicate your interest in the queue. Trustee Wade.
Thank you so much. I want to I would like to accept or like to propose the full funded PUA proposal that you've put out. And I wanted to ask real quick on the long-term financial planning guide that you have here, which is the arrows. Thank you. Page 7, that we look at this, the engaging the HISD stakeholders and the community members a little sooner than when we get into the analyze the school alignment and community arrows. Maybe we need to back those up a bit.
We'll take that into account.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Guidry.
Thank you, President Cruz and Superintendent House. Superintendent House, let me just say this. I want to thank you and your administration for bringing forth an innovative idea in the original plan. I think that plan brought forth something to the district that we had not seen before. In a time such as this, we needed something new and something different. I'm going to encourage you to copyright that hybrid plan since it has not been adopted anywhere. I can assure you that in the future we're going to see that plan proposed and utilized in a district that is willing to attempt equity and to roll up their sleeves and to do what is necessary so that they can attempt equity within their district. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. I stand with you with the transformational schools. I want you to know that this trustee supports you, back you, and I'm looking forward to you all bringing a success with respect to the 24 transformational schools since we can't get it throughout the district, but I'm hoping that that would bring it to the district when we start there. Thank you for the efforts you brought, for the time you put into bringing it, and I know that I'm not standing in a place of, with the majority, but I looked at the plan. It needed work. It needed work. But we were willing to put in the work. I was willing to put in the work with you all to get it where it needed to be. Unfortunately, we'll never see that plan in action, but hopefully we can see some action with the 24 transformational schools. Thank you, sir.
Trustee Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. House, for giving us this platform again to state our opinion. My opinion has not changed from last week. I still would like the maintaining of the PUA, the current PUA allotment, to remain. And I want to say ditto to Trustee Wade's comments about starting engaging with HISD stakeholders and the community members sooner than 2023 about the long-term financial planning of HISD. Thank you.
Trustee Bluford Daniels.
Thank you, Madam President. I, too, would like to say thank you to your staff. I know it has been grueling work trying to come up with a plan, but the most important thing is that you all heard us. You heard our concerns from those schools that have been neglected and overlooked for so long. And as I often say, particularly in D2. And I want to say thank you again. You all came up with a plan to not continue kicking the can down the road, as we've said so often. So I appreciate that. And just for those that are listening, of the 24 transformation schools, 10 are in District 2. So you can see why my concern is for a system that will level the playing field and create some equality for schools that have for so long been overlooked. There's been a lot of comments about libraries. Some of the schools in D2 don't even have libraries. Some of the schools in D3 don't even have libraries. So I appreciate the effort. I actually prefer the initial plan, but I will go with the will of the board.
Trustees, anyone else in the queue? Trustee Santos?
Thank you, President Cruz. Superintendent House, I have some clarifying questions for the public. So what are our total expenditures, our operating costs?
Chief Reed.
Our total expenditures are about $2 billion a year.
About $2 billion. You don't have an actual dollar number?
Let me pull up the board agenda real quick. Yeah, this year it's about 2.3.
2.3. So what was our actual revenue?
Chief Reed.
About 2.8.
So it was 2.3, you said, was our budget, what we spent?
Well, we're still in the middle of spending.
Okay.
But the budget that's being considered tonight is 2.3.
Okay. And so our revenue was 2.8? So are we spending more or less than our revenues historically?
We're spending more than our revenues this year.
So how can we budget more accurately so that our actual expenditures match our budget?
So part of that, Mayor, we've talked about this in previous meetings about carryover. We've got about $160 million there that's carryover alone that we already have set aside. Those are expenditures from the prior year that didn't liquidate by the end of the year, and we set those dollars aside. So it's not all just spending dollars above what our revenues.
So Superintendent House, for this trustee, the abouts don't work. I know that former trustee Sung, every year since January 2018, we've been asking about enrollment-based funding, but she said it best, when we average those teachers, that we're charging schools the average teacher cost, the cost of an average teacher's salary, and these figures aren't matching up. So the schools with, I need to slow down, give me 1 second, I'm sorry. Our kids, through no fault of their own, that are subjected to the poverty penalty need the help now. This is not a time to leave them behind. Trustee Ms. Sung, policy, education, and HR experts, stated 2 studies that tell us that we have the most inequitable systems in place for our most vulnerable students. They need us now. I've heard you, Trustee Bluford Daniels, Trustee Guidry. I've been asking since January of 2018 what it would take to go into enrollment-based funding, and every time the HISD's administration response is, we need to look more, we need more time, we need more time, we need more time. We know that funding is inequitable. I brought forth 2 plans in 2020, June 2020 and June 2019 and June 2019 and 2020 to reduce the poverty penalty, where we average the cost of enrollment-based funding and attendance-based funding. My ask for this trustee, I'm good, keep the PUA, don't change it, keep the dollar amount, but we need to address this poverty penalty. We need to stop penalizing our students for not being able to come to school. And my question is, can we reduce the half of the poverty penalty if we use a multiplier, the 0.97, and get those schools at least half of the funding that they're losing?
A part of what I indicated earlier is our expectation. And I know you've heard this prior to me getting here, but this is what we want to do, and we think is the most fiduciary thing to do. We need to study it. We have some partners in Alvarez and Marsal to really take a close look at this to see what the impact might look like moving forward. So that's a part of the plan for 22-23 is to take a look at these different options so that if we do want to change course, make modifications, do whatever we want to do, we can do it and make it as an informed decision as we move down the road.
Okay, then I need 2 answers to give you my 2 questions. Answer 2 questions to. I need to ask 2 questions so you can get my answer. Number 1, what would be the dollar amount if we did reduce their poverty penalty by half? And I know Glenn is going to tell me it's about $15 million. And so if we can't find $15 million in our budget to eliminate half of the poverty penalty, I don't think I can agree with your budget moving forward. Like, we have to do something about our kids in areas of high concentration of poverty that can't make it to school. We need to help our kids now, especially during COVID, the impacts of COVID now. So we've got to do something for that poverty penalty.
Trustee Santos, you're out of time.
Thank you.
Trustee Baker.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague out in the audience, Pastor F.M. Williams II. Thank you so much. I stand in agreement with the fully funded PUA model. I do have a question, but before I ask that question, the fully funded PUA model, it lets the public know, especially those teachers who invoke that try to contact me, let them know that we've listened and we've responded appropriately. Moving forward, has protocol been established that if surplus monies are detected going forward, that it will be considered beforehand in future budgets?
Absolutely. As I indicated earlier, a part of the identified overflow that we saw in terms of the $300 million, we're utilizing that in this budget cycle as a part of what we're seeing in terms of need of the deficit. So we're taking that into account, and we're doing what's most responsible as we move forward. So again, I moved forward to push for this audit. Otherwise, we may be doing the same thing. So I'm glad we did, so that we can do what's necessary to ensure that we make the necessary adjustments and move forward to utilize the taxpayer dollar as best as possible.
Thank you and your team for listening to the hearts of the people. Thank you so much.
Anyone else in the queue? Trustee Dygard?
Thank you. So, Mr. House, I appreciate this. We were a leader 20 years ago in efforts towards student-based funding. I'll be the first, well, certainly not the first to admit, one of many to admit, and I've shared this with you, that I think we're long overdue for reform of what our formulas are. And this includes not just the PUA, but all buckets of money that we allocate directly to campuses that are at the discretion of principals, including magnet funding, discretionary funding, small school subsidies, any other buckets that might be out there, and looking at them holistically, not just the PUA formula, to make sure we're driving more dollars to our students who need them most, including our students who struggle to get to school. I hope that, as you look forward on this, I appreciate that you've got third parties out there. I hope that one of those third parties will do a resource use study so we can identify what campuses are currently spending their dollars on from these different buckets that are allocated to them, identifying some of those best practices that may be little hidden gems of ways that they have used their budgets really, really smart, and then also identify ways that they may not be using their dollars as effectively for our kids. So I hope that your plan moving forward will include such a study. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Plan also will include, just FYI, we are asking the same third party, have asked the same third party to take a close look at procurement processes and vendors. So very soon, we'll have that insight to not only share with you, but share with the public as well.
Trustee Bluford Daniels, you can finish your time.
Thank you. I had 49 seconds left. I did want to add this point, and I've mentioned it sort of amongst the trustees. And I wish that in the future, perhaps for the 23-24 calendar year, we can look at retaining half the PUA at the original community school. And when that child goes to another school, then that PUA goes with them. People are not going to like it, but at least it will remain in the community where the child was originally assigned. Thank you.
And just want to add my comment and really want to reiterate how grateful I am that you have done those audits. Long overdue and critical, and thank you for continuing that work. As I've stated before, I do not support cutting the PUA. I will not support cutting funds to schools. Our students will not benefit from cuts to the classroom. I absolutely support the compensation plan. Our teachers are long overdue for a pay raise that puts them on par with our neighboring districts. I do have a question. In terms of the required positions, there is finite money, so that means there's a trade-off, and I don't think any of us would argue that schools need all of these positions. But my question is, why would you I guess help me understand why you believe, for example, a librarian will get us closer to meeting our goals than, say, a college counselor at a high school as a required position?
Much like we brought in the original hybrid plan, which I believe actually, I can't remember who mentioned it, but somebody said trademark it. Too late, Chicago's using it as of I think in the last 24 hours. But what I will say is a part of that plan was to identify specific things that we not only heard in the community, but we see as particular needs. And we know that literacy is closely aligned with the literature that kids need to have in their hands and see. And we feel that libraries, whether it's an electronic library or a traditional library that you walk into and check books out, we think these elements are extremely important. And it's the same thing with the two other positions that we've identified in the PUA alternative that we brought to the table. So this was kind of a compromise because we knew what the will of the board was, but we wanted to have at least some kind of equity that speaks to what we think is important in all schools.
So I'm hearing you say you feel like those three positions will help us get us closer to our achieving the board goals. So you feel like that input will, for the example I gave,
yes,
the librarian will help us help more students
yes,
need more than any other input.
I do.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, seeing no one else in the queue. Oh, sorry, Trustee Goodry.
Don't worry about my time. What about your?
Trustee Guidry.
Time to give you though.
You got 11 seconds.
Let me just say this. My grandmother told me that a pig with a lipstick is still a pig. And I just believe the PUA, the lipstick, are those three required positions. Although I'm glad there's something, but it's still the same thing. Thank you.
What I'll say, Trustee Guidry, is I hear you, but as superintendent of this district, I had to do something. If the will of the board here was to go in the direction, I had to do something to be able to offer some kind of equity in my eyes to align with this particular model. So I respect where you're coming from. My original proposal is what I would have preferred as well, but this is where we are. And my hope is we can find some kind of even median in the future that aligns with what's best for all kids.
I get it, Superintendent, but can you tell me where the equity comes in with the PUA fully funded? Where is equity? That's what I'm seeking here. I'm looking for equity, and I don't see it. I don't see it.
I would say that conversation doesn't necessarily need to be directed at me. I would say that conversation needs to be had collectively at the dais. But this is where we are, and we've got to get allocations out to our principals ASAP so that they can move forward with hiring. Again, not necessarily where I wanted to land, but this is where we are.
Trustee Baker.
Yes, just want to ask a question to colleagues, Trustee Santos' point. How do we plan to reduce the, balance the playing field with the poverty penalty going forward? You know, with schools that have PUA, that have more students in the black and brown communities. How do we plan to balance that equation going forward?
As I indicated earlier, Trustee Baker, the idea is to take a close look at what other possibilities, study it over the course of the 22-23 school year, and see what other possibilities might exist, so that if we want and need to make tweaks to have a better funding model, we can have the necessary research that's been done to take a close look at what that looks like. So that's a part of what we plan to do over the course of next year.
And do you plan to lay out specifically prerequisites before you make any decisions on closing schools?
In terms of funding?
Yeah, overall.
Can you restate your question? I didn't understand what you said.
When you mentioned that it might have to do anything possible in the future, it may include closing schools.
We're in a district for several years where there's been huge deficits. And what we have to understand, we lost 15,000, 20,000 students over the course of 10 years. But we haven't done anything to right size. So if we want to get to a place that we actually right size our district to have a zero-based budget at some point, you're going to have to look at everything. And that includes the potential of a process that would include the community coming together and looking at consolidations. You have to look at everything. We have to look at what we're doing right now and trying to come to the table with a $60 million reduction here at Hattie Mae that will affect bus drivers, that will affect, several different entities you have to look at everything. So it's not an easy task, but it's necessary for everything to be looked at. But I do believe that it can't be something done in a vacuum. It has to be done with the community input, getting out there, doing the listen and learns, making sure that people know that this is not going to be done to them, that if something occurs, we're going to do our best to do it with them and make sure that there's understanding around where we need to be, what the systems and processes need to look like along the way. Should it be done in conjunction with bonds? Should it be done? All of those things have to be brought to the table. Otherwise, we'll continue down the road financially that we've been for several years.
Okay.
Trustee Baker, you're out of time. The clock restarted. We're doing one round. Trustee Hernandez.
I hear you, Trustee Guidry. I do want to say that the PUA model can definitely be equitable for all our students. Has HISD done it correctly in the past? The answer is no. Can HISD significantly change the way that we use the PUA model to make it equitable for all of our children? The answer is yes. That's what I want to see happen. I do support the PUA model, but like I stated last time, I think that there needs to be significant changes. We paid a lot of money for the Alvarez and Marsal report, and that report states that the PUA model needs to be taught, needs to be implemented, and principals need to understand how to use their budgets. We need to make sure that we are training all the staff in HISD so that the PUA model can actually work for equity for all students. My district is mostly low-income brown students, brown and black students. I definitely understand that there is a lot of inequities in HISD. There's a lot of inequities in District 2 and District 3. We need to change that. But the PUA model, we can get there with this funding. With the PUA model funding system, we can get there. We just need to make sure that there is significant changes. I don't know what those are, Mr. House, but I'm sure that it can be done in HISD so that all of our kids get what they need from this district.
I do want to just state one item. The Alvarez and Marsal study that was done did not come out of district funds, just FYI.
Thank you. Trustee Wade.
And I want to back what Donnie said as well. So I support what Donnie said as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Our next item for discussion is A2, Acceptance of Board Monitoring Update Presentation of Goal 2, Progress Measures 1, 2, and 3. Superintendent House, we are ready for your update.
Thank you, President Cruz. I'd like to invite Dr. Allison Madney to the podium to talk to us specifically about Goal 2, which of course is third grade math. Dr. Madney?
Thank you, Superintendent House, Trustees. I'm here this evening to talk about Goal 2, Progress Measures 1, 2, and 3. This is our mathematics goal. And we're going to be looking at the middle of year Renaissance results. That window was January 10th through February 11th. And then our end of year window is going to be April 28th through June 1st. So we're right in between those two right now, but we have the middle of year results ready to share with you. So Goal 2 states the percentage of third grade students performing at or above grade level in math is measured by STAR meets grade level standard will increase 8 percentage points from 46 to 54 in spring 2024. Our first progress measure is for our first grade students performing on grade level in math is measured by the end of year math screener, which is Renaissance, will increase 8 percentage points from 64 to 72. So on this slide, again, I'm just going to kind of orient you. There's lots of lines working. On the far left-hand side, we see our 17-18 data, 18-19, and then 19-20. And if you'll recall, we did not do end-of-year Renaissance testing in 19-20. We went home after middle of year for COVID. 2020-2021, we looked at on-campus testers, off-campus testers, our math performance. The red line is the target, and so at beginning of year, when I presented to y'all this data for our first graders in 21-22, we were at 62%, at or above benchmark, and for middle of year, we have gone up 4 points to 66%. So we do consider ourselves on track with this data point. We saw a 6 percentage point increase among our Hispanic students. We did see a 1 percentage point decrease for African American, white, and Asian students. Here is our English only data for our first grade students. We're about 2 percentage points below the target. This population of students stayed steady at 64% from beginning of year to middle of year. And then looking at our Spanish assessments, we went from 56% to 64%, an 8 percentage point increase from beginning of year. In looking at 2.2, this is the percentage of second grade students performing on grade level in math as measured by the end of year math screener, increasing 8 percentage points from 62 to 70 in 2024. So here we look at our second grade scores. Again, beginning of year this year, we were at 47% of our second grade students scoring at or above benchmark. We increased 15 percentage points to 62% at or above benchmark, which is just about 2 points below where we expect to be. So we are on track for end of year this year. We are slightly below pre-pandemic. So if you look at 1920, middle of year, we were at 63%, and we're at 62%. So we are slightly below, but certainly in a much better situation than we were with mathematics coming out of the pandemic at the beginning of year. Our largest decrease was seen among our emergent bilingual English learners. So we increased from beginning of year to middle of year with that population, but when you look at middle of year from 1920 to middle of year this year, that was our largest decrease. For our English only testers, we went from 44% to 58% at or above benchmark. Our Spanish assessments went from 52 to 68%. Again, just 1 percentage point below the pre-pandemic 69%. And for second grade students with disabilities, and I'm going to pause, you do not see a students with disabilities slide for first grade students because as a reminder, the majority of the identification processes start happening in first going into second grade. So the number is just not high enough to report out for first grade. So we start that reporting here at second grade. So here we can see they started the year off at 28% at or above benchmark, and they increased 6 percentage points to 34. So much higher than pre-pandemic for this student group. For 2.3, we're looking at the percentage of third grade students performing on grade level in math as measured by the end of year math screener, increasing 8 percentage points from 69 to 77 in 2024. So here we look at our English and Spanish results combined. Again, an increase going from 50% at beginning of year to 64%, a 14 percentage point increase between beginning of year and middle of year. Still behind where we were pre-pandemic. We ended at middle of year pre-pandemic at 68%. So the 64 is 4 points below pre-pandemic MOI. Our largest decrease again was seen among our emergent bilingual English learners when you look at middle of year to middle of year. Our English only assessments went from 48 to 62. Our Spanish only, 51 to 64. And for students with disabilities, we're again seeing those large increases among this student group, 14 percentage point gain, which includes a 7-point gain between middle of year pre-pandemic to now. So this student group is coming out of the pandemic at a much higher level than going in. So next steps include the high quality instructional materials, making sure that those plans are in place to help account for the high mobility areas, ensuring that tight alignment. These are levers that we're starting to pull and prep for and get the materials in, get training going. And then those acceleration and remediation strategies. So still going and looking at who's still, what groups, what classrooms, which individual students are still not showing that increase that we're expecting right now, and what can we do to help support that and bolster that in mathematics. And that concludes the presentation, Trustee Cruz.
We are ready for comments or questions from trustees. We will do 2 rounds of 2 minutes each. If an additional round is desired, that can be done with the motion, second, and board vote. Trustee Wade. Sorry, I think that was from last time. Trustee Guidry.
Thank you, Dr. Matney. Dr. Matney, on the slides, and the Superintendent House, thank you. On the slides, at or above benchmark is the 40th percentile. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So if we go down to package page 28, I'm just curious as to, well, no, I maybe know why you did it, but Superintendent House, wouldn't it be prudent for us to target our African-American children at least at benchmark? We have our African-American children, no other child, no other group, below benchmark. My question is, why don't we set a standard for them to reach at least benchmark?
Yeah. And Dr. Mehta, will you talk a little bit about the difference between the standards and the why we actually set standards at different levels, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, and packet page 28 is looking at goal 2, so we're looking at third grade data on this. This is the actual third grade data, and then where our targets need to be. And we consistently see our African American student population lagging behind our other student groups. And so this chart works to help address and tease that out so that we're not just setting a target for one grade level. We're setting individual targets for different student groups. At or above benchmark is the area that Renaissance says that's where they need to be, is at or above. We say at or above because we want to make sure that we're including those students at the higher level too, so it's at and then anything on top of that.
Exactly. So why shouldn't our children be set at least at benchmark?
And that is what these targets are looking at. So
But it's not, Dr. Magny. You have our children set at 35%, 39%. We're not at benchmark until 2023, 2024. I want them at benchmark today.
Yes, ma'am, and I know exactly what you're talking about here. So this chart that you're looking at is third grade star. The at or above benchmark is a different assessment. This is at grade level, but again, you're exactly right. That data is lower. What we did when we set these standards is we looked at where they were and we accelerated higher, but our expectations in classrooms are much higher than just what's on this, absolutely.
And you know I'm not going after you, Dr. Miller. Okay.
Thank you. Trustee Bluford Daniels.
This is not a 1-2 punch, but we've had a little conversation about that because I had tagged to package page 28 about the African American, Hispanic, white, and Asian students. So the goal for, if we can go to page 28 on the screen, please. It was 28 when I first looked at it. Can we go there? On page 20, Dr. Madney?
I only have the PowerPoint loaded here,
Okay.
and page 28 in the packet is not part of the PowerPoint.
Okay, okay. Well, let me just say this right quick. Give my time back. I'm reclaiming my time. African American students' goal is 31%. Hispanic students' goal is 45%. White student goals are 72%, and Asian student goals are 85%. So if the African American students are 31% and they're only achieving 12% for this goal for this third grade star, Hispanics is 45% and they're achieving 19%. Let me go to my jars and show what equity does not look like. For those of you that may not be familiar with it, the black is indicative of what our status is for the African American children, the Hispanic children, the white children, and our goal. So this remains here, and as you hear us talk about leveling the playing field, look at where we are right now and where we've been for some time, for at least 5, 6, 7 years. Thank you.
What I'll say is I I do not disagree with you in reference to leveling the playing field. As you all know, I was several of us were actually turnaround principals. I was a turnaround principal in a school that had a 99% African American population. Some of the things that we have in our strategic plan, from quality curriculum, ensuring that we improve the instructional strategies, will increase across the board. I'd like to have Dr. Sean Bird, our Chief Academic Officer, to share some additional insight here for trustees to gain additional insight.
Thank you, Superintendent. And Trustees Guidry and Bluford Daniels, this is exactly why we have to implement high-quality instructional materials, because as national studies show, the opportunity myth was done a few years ago, and it looked at school districts across the country. And what you see over and over again is wide achievement gaps, especially among Black and Latinx students. And that is because oftentimes they are not ever given grade level material, so they can never achieve on these tests at grade level because they're never given the material to begin with. So that's the whole purpose of implementing high quality instructional materials and really supporting teachers and training them to scaffold so that kids who are not going to walk in the door necessarily at grade level, but to get them there. And this data really is reinforced by national studies around demographic groups.
And I appreciate that. I just think we should raise that bar, but I just want people to hear as we converse about equity, where we are and where we've been for a while, and what is it going to take to raise that floor for those Black and brown kids.
Thank you. Trustee Dygard.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing this out, Trustee Guidry. This was something when we passed our board goals, Dr. Lathan brought for all of our goals, and also for all of our goals for every single campus, had brought these different targets for the different years. We had a big conversation. I think this might have been before you were on the board. I don't think we actually had to approve these. I do recall there were a lot of questions around them and a lot of concerns similar to what you have just expressed. I just want to be fair to our administrators that are standing in front of us today. This isn't what they're bringing us. This is what was brought to us over a year ago. So what I'm going to offer up, Mr. Superintendent, in light of what you're hearing from my colleagues, you've inherited all of this. I hope you'll consider, revisiting these with your staff and also the school-based ones, and, do your own assessment on whether or not you think these are the appropriate targets for the different groups of our kids moving forward, especially as you continue to develop your strategic plan. So thank you.
Trustee Hernandez.
I agree with leveling the playing field. When we were discussing these goals, as most of you know, especially Dr. Matney, my idea was to have a 12-point jump. We started with 4, we ended at 8. That 12-point jump would have meant that our African American students and our Hispanic students had to have had a higher average, a higher baseline than they have right here. That's why I was advocating for those 12 points, because I thought that it was very important in order to make, when you average this out, that means that your lowest students have to jump up in order for you to make that 12-point jump. We only, as a board, we only got to 8 points. I was disappointed in that, but I think that the 12 points, if you want to change it, I'm all for it still. But in terms of the math curriculum, I know that that one of the reports. Okay. Well, next time.
Sue, are you in there for round 2, Trustee Dygert? Okay. I definitely want to echo the concerns expressed by Trustee Guidry and Trustee Bluford Daniels. And Trustee Dygard, you are correct. These targets were not set by the board. These the student group targets, and I agree that I think they are too low, particularly for our African American students. Wanted to ask. So on slide 8, You mentioned the emergent bilingual students. I'm trying to remember. Can't see slide 8. I think if I remember correctly from the slide, that those were the students that did not grow in math. What were some of the findings with that student group?
Dr. Mandy?
Yeah, so when we look at to middle of year, that's where we saw the largest decreases. And again, when you think about math, when you're teaching math, you're not absorbing those concrete, when we're talking about first, second, and third graders, you're not absorbing really the processes with those concrete models just through talking on a screen. And so when we look at groups that already had a language barrier, if we're talking about not just our bilingual students, but if we're talking about like our ESL students from another country and they're learning remotely, they're not getting that hands-on. And so we are looking at where they were before pandemic and then where they are now. That large decrease is really looking at that access to language and those manipulatives and being able to do instead of just hear.
Thank you. And wanted to ask or comment slide 11 and 16, the growth with with students with disabilities despite the pandemic, just amazed. And I'm assuming that's because of a lot of the changes in compliance and such. But just curious, are there any practices that can be replicated with other student groups? I mean, this is really to be commended.
There's been quite a bit of work that has gone into, of course, we did have a third-party audit specifically in reference to special education as well, to take a close look at, practices, why we were seeing so many special education complaints that came from TEA. Those have slowed quite a bit. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this for some of our most vulnerable students of all races and grade levels. So we're proud of this, but there's still work to do.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone for round 1? You're for round 2? Or no, round 1? Have you gone? Trustee Baker, did you go in round 1? Go ahead.
I just wanted to support my colleague on our right, Trustee Hernandez, and the comments that Trustee Kat Bluford Daniels made. We do need to raise the target for those groups that you mentioned. I hope that we get there, because the good book says that if we write the vision and make it plain, the people will run with it. So I believe that if we step out on faith and do that one day, that we'll give the children higher goals to reach, and they will reach them.
Trustee Dygard, round 2.
Thank you. So something that I did observe and stuff, we're not where we want to be for proficiency, right? We didn't hit our target on that. But there are several in the disaggregated data, and even on some of these slides in the aggregate, you have areas where kids made more growth between beginning of the year and middle of the year this year than they were making pre-COVID. And while I am still deeply concerned with our target for our African-American kids being lower, on Progress Measure 2.2, I noticed they made more growth beginning of the year to middle of the year this year than they did pre-COVID. So it begs the question to me of which ESSER COVID recovery investments are contributing to this bigger growth this year in those areas. And what have you identified that can then be learned from to grow the kids even more?
So as you indicated, we're excited about that growth that we're seeing as a result of many instructional accelerators in the process. Of course, COVID allowed for us to do some things different because of ESSER dollars, with schools having extra resources for tutoring, for all the different things that we know can make a major difference. Of course, House Bill 45 does require students who do not achieve grade level proficiency last year to receive 30 supplemental hours of small group instruction. And we anticipate that this additional time that has been bestowed upon us has helped with the increase as well. Now, HB 4545 is funded, of course, by ESSER. And of course, we know that won't be in place forever, but at least for another couple years. We also know that with math specifically in these younger grade levels, hands-on learning is crucial to ensure that we have the kind of manipulatives in place to really help to drive the instruction. Getting all of our students back in person, of course, made a difference. That's huge, and I know pre-pandemic we're seeing some stronger increases this year than we saw before the pandemic, but we want that to increase. Dr. Bird said something earlier that I think is extremely important. It starts with having the highest level curriculum so kids, especially our lowest performers, can see what good curriculum looks like. So teachers can see and have the professional development for good curriculum as well. As I mentioned, ESSER has also allowed for us to raise the teacher tutorial dollar amount that we pay them as well, which has encouraged more of them to be at the table to touch more students from the standpoint of the after-school tutorial. So I think all of those things have made a difference in terms of us seeing some of the growth. Again, it's good to have the growth, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Trustee Bluford Daniels.
I'm just going to add this other point, because I know, and Dr. Madden and Superintendent House, we know it's not, this was something that you all inherited. I got it. But as people hear me often say about District 2, though my colleagues don't say their district number, they're still advocating for their districts. And it was mentioned about the 12-point increase. Trustee Hernandez mentioned about her fighting for, and she did, for the 12-point increase to raise the bar. But my concern is, even if we did the 12-point increase, we're not even making the 8-point increase right now. And we have not made enough adjustment. What I'm saying is it should be more targeted as to, even with Plan 1, the initial plan, the new plan would have allowed for more programs, teacher incentives, and so the education race in general would begin at the same starting point and have the same vision or the goal toward the end for all the children. And then when I say about raising the floor, that's an opportunity to raise that floor. And that way the rich campuses would not continue to keep the money in their campuses and allow opportunities for the small schools. Thank you.
Trustee Bluford Daniels, what I would add is that some of the same strategies that we've employed to realize some of the gains that you guys saw today between, of course, beginning of the year, middle of the year, we want to continue to provide the supplemental instruction that we know is extremely important. Using the data at the classroom level is extremely important. Kids need to know how they're growing and what that looks like. I can remember in my 10 years as principal, we taught our kids what it was to understand their data, and that helps to drive instruction as well. So we must do a better job in doing so. There's also the possibility that the slight dips that we saw or stagnation that we saw in the end of the year is due to the time of the year. Sometimes, some schools don't, in some instances, don't test when they need to test. It's also a situation where I have a 11-year-old son and not excited about going in testing. So it's important that we take all of those contributing factors as we look at this data. But again, there's work to do, and we're excited about the things that we're putting in place to continue to see the kind of growth and gains that we want to see.
Trustee Hernandez.
Thank you. I know one of the recommendations is to cut out every school having a different math program and reading program. I know that I-4, there's a math program, Agile, that's supposed to be for 6 to 8, but we're using Carnegie Math for 6 to 8. Can you tell me how those two align?
Yeah, I can talk
Dr.
about
Burt?
that. So Agile is a summer. We're using it in a summer program because it does address some of the mindset issues that students have that are behind in math, particularly those students who are rising to Algebra 1. And there's some data that supports its efficacy in improving students' attitude about math as well as accelerating achievement. So Carnegie will be implemented over the next couple of years, but it is a gradual implementation, and we wouldn't implement that just for the summer because it just would be too much of a lift for teachers to learn that in a very short period of time.
Okay. And then another one of the recommendations from the curriculum report is that classrooms don't have high-quality materials. What is the district doing to ensure that every classroom has high-quality materials?
So in addition to the adoption of the print materials, digital materials, we're also purchasing manipulative kits for every elementary school that will complement Eureka, as well as there's a digital component that students can use at home and as well as teachers can use in the classroom. So that is why it's really important that we have broad support for I've told my team we're going to really focus on learning this curriculum very well, and so that we can support it appropriately at schools. And that's why we need to focus on just a couple of things so that we can support them well.
When is every school in HISD supposed to be using that program?
24, 25.
Okay.
So not this coming school year, but the next.
Okay, and then there was another recommendation that there should be cross-functional committees for math. Is this being implemented, and how can this help our students?
So there is a group that worked on the kind of instructional vision for math that was cross-functional, and then I will be meeting with teachers, as that's part of the reason we're implementing in a select number of schools first, is so that we can meet with teachers along the way to modify the training and support needs that they need. So there'll be focus groups set up that are made up of teachers across the school district that are implementing this program, particularly next year, so that we can learn from implementation. Just as I'm about to schedule some focus groups with teachers that are implementing those middle schools that implemented Carnegie, those 6 schools, I'm going to set up focus groups with them so we can learn for round 2 of Carnegie implementation. So there'll be teacher voice and input throughout the implementation process.
What are we doing from now until 2024? Because every school is doing different things.
That's right. So in addition, the schools that are not participating in the initial year, there will be an additional complementary product that is aligned to the standards and will work with Go Math. So we're going to start bumping up the rigor in all of our math classes next year with a complementary product that will also give those teachers a head start on implementation of Eureka for the following year.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Trustee Guidry?
So Trustee Bluford Daniel has been asking for this for a while, and I'm going to ask, perhaps we need board movement on this. But if you go to slide 10, where it has, you can see the examination there are of Spanish only. I'm requesting that we have an examination of African American only, and look at me, I'm going to go ahead and throw in equity. Let's do white only, let's do Asian only, but we need the public to see in graphs the same way they're seeing with respect to the English and the Spanish and these specialties. Let's break it down for each group so that the public can see the inequities and that gap that is going on that is not being seen. And so if the board has to move on that, Superintendent House, let me know. I'll make a motion so that we can have it, if it's possible, for the administration to have it done.
We'd be glad, of course, my understanding this is the way it's been done for quite some time, but we know the definition of insanity is doing things the same way. So we're open to looking at, and we look at all subgroups. We don't look at one particular group. This is the way the data has been presented in the past, but we're open to presenting it however the will of the board wants to see it moving forward.
Like that. Bam, done. Thank you.
Trustee Wade?
Thank you, Trustee Cruz. I wanted to ask a question. So We see that these reports are and targets are solely based on test-related and sometimes to the loss of focus on what's good in classrooms with the teachers and creativity and what they're doing to get successful results. Are you able to get any data from successful classrooms that are showing high results on what they're doing to prosper their children? I mean, is that something we're looking at on top of this, the test result, just the basic start or the test results from?
Absolutely. And Dr. Manny, I can see you itching to come in. I got some comments too.
Absolutely. So accountability and assessment may be in my wheelhouse, but I certainly was moved by our student speaker earlier today. And having 2 students in HISD myself and having been a teacher, assistant principal, and a principal, I'm a firm believer in you teach the content, you teach in an engaging way, and the test will happen. And so that is when we find those classrooms where that happens, it's very powerful to help replicate that and have peers come in and see, you know, I didn't do all these packets and I didn't do all this test prep, and here are my results because it was engaging and hands-on, and so we see where those pockets are. Our student assessment team goes out. I know our schools office team, of course, is out there seeing where that's happening and being able to watch those data points increase without all of the scared safety nets sometimes that we see.
I really do appreciate that because I think that's really important for us to remember that they are human beings and we're just trying to grab every bit of gift we can out of these kids. So again, thank you for that.
Trustee Allen?
Come on, Blanket. My question is, when we were talking about these engaging teachers and the Carnegie math and aligning to the Go math, when will the teachers receive their professional development on those programs? I'm into making the changes. Let's get into the instruction. Let's get into teaching our children, and when they're going to get, when are we going to have this high quality instructional materials, the remediation strategies, and the professional development?
And the PD
when is that going to happen?
The PD is extremely important. Not only is the PD important, but the execution once after the PD happens and the fidelity. That's what drives once we have teachers trained up. But the fidelity, sticking with it and making sure that we focus our efforts. Dr. Bird, you want to share a little bit in terms of timeline?
Yep, so we'll begin with the curriculum team in April this month, and then we'll roll it out for teachers after testing is over. So the ones that don't want to come in the summer or teaching summer school or whatever, there'll be an opportunity for them to come in May, June, July, and August. So we'll catch everybody before school starts. We'll get the new teachers in pre-service days, but then there are days built in the calendar that you all adopted in October for a calibration day. There are multiple days that they'll have support. And so in addition to just the vendor coming and doing the unboxing training, we are working with partners to have in-school coaching with teachers. And I think, to the earlier points, one of the things that we're looking at is the data, yes, but how often we test kids and what we are using to test kids. These products have curriculum embedded assessments that will give teachers data to really inform their instruction, and at the classroom level. That's one of the appealing things about this, is that teachers will have actionable data and they'll have support in their classroom to help them take action on that data. So that'll be ongoing throughout the school year. Yep.
Okay, we've been hearing a lot about the math. What about the reading?
So that will come in 6 schools next year because we don't want to overwhelm elementary teachers with 2 brand new, because it is a heavy lift for a math curriculum alone. That's a very heavy lift for teachers. So there are 6 schools that will participate next year, and then we will scale that up. So it'll be a year behind the math. So far right now we're looking at Amplify, but I'm also looking at we're looking at various products that are on the market. Right now the TEA has approved Amplify but there's conversations there may be other options as well. Sorry? It's well, it's a knowledge-based curriculum. I did see it in action, and it's very engaging for students, and even talked to teachers in another school district that said one of the things that they have enjoyed most about it is the students' interest in reading has increased, just kind of through the implementation in Dallas ISD. Yeah.
Thank you. Trustee Hernandez, you didn't go on round 2 yet? I did. Oh, you're just going to finish your 16 seconds? Go ahead.
So to Trustee Guidry's point, I and other trustees on this board have asked for the data to be broken down by Hispanic students testing in Spanish and those testing in English, because those are two different sets of data. And Hispanic students are not a monolith. There's students who are not Spanish, not Hispanic testing in Spanish. So that broken down, I think, would help the board understand what's going on in our schools. Thank you.
Just FYI, I think students who are in the bilingual setting may take the Spanish version only, or may be assessed in both English and Spanish. The data that you saw helps to support the instructional program and provided, specifically by the teacher. Dr. Maddie, any other insights you want to provide there?
Yeah, so you're exactly correct. This is there in order to kind of tease out the language pieces of it, but not necessarily Hispanic versus not. And so that was a request. I definitely appreciate we're actually currently in a governance cohort, and one of the things that we're looking at internally is our reporting and updating and making sure that it's responsive to where we are now in 2022. And so I've been making my notes here, so I appreciate that.
And in terms of Trustee Guidry's request, we already have that data, right? So I second her request in getting that in graphs. I think it would help all of us see that, and the public as well. And also second Trustee Hernandez's request in breaking down Hispanic students between English and Spanish, because I think I'm curious to see that, and I think it'll give us a very different story. Wanted to ask on slide 2.1, I'm sorry, GPM 2.1. Asian kids dropped since the beginning of year. Any insight on that?
No, really hard to make this determination. Quite frankly, Dr. Maddie and I talked about this specifically earlier, but there are a lot of different determinants that go into what this looks like. We'll continue to take a close look at it, but we don't have a definitive answer in reference to the actual why.
Okay, that's helpful. And then why was there more growth in second and third grade than in first grade?
Second and third grade, which slide?
Than in first grade. Just comparing overall, I guess, kind of all the slides, right?
Dr. Matt, do you want to share some insight here?
Sure. So our first grade results are from our early literacy test. There are some students in first grade that take the reading screener for Renaissance, but early literacy is the primary screener for kindergarten and first grade. Second and third grade is where the bulk of our students are taking the reading and not the early literacy. So it's really not apples to apples to look, because they're addressing some different things, but we're making sure that we're monitoring that to make sure it's not just a result of the assessment, but because they're two different screeners, we try not to necessarily compare them.
That's helpful. And then were there any schools in HISD that are exceeding the district average?
Absolutely, and we'd be glad to, if you're looking for a list to be able to share that information, we can get a list.
Okay, yeah. That's great. Yeah, I saw that y'all shared it for last week's progress monitoring. I appreciate that. Trustee Dygard, did you do a second round?
Yeah, I want to make a motion for a third round, please.
Go ahead.
At this point,
I'm good.
I move, because this is the most important part of our meetings, that we do a third round of progress monitoring.
We have a movement A motion by Trustee Dygard and a second by Trustee Baker. Any discussion? Please vote. Six, 4, 0 against, 0 abstentions. Trustees, just want to note the time and our policy for having hearing of the community. Is your preference to pause and do hearing of the community and then do the third round, or do the third round and then hearing of the community? Okay, go ahead.
So my first question is, why is there a decline in the number of test takers between beginning of the year and middle of the year?
And this is something that I mentioned earlier, but I'll let Dr. Madney clarify.
Yeah, so we have an assessment calendar, and we definitely follow up, and student assessment sends out the participation rates to make sure that leaders are monitoring those assessment rates. But we did see a more significant dip in participation rates middle of year this year than in beginning of year. In fact, we had a campus that didn't participate in Renaissance at all in middle of year. And so we are concerned in looking at how we can tighten that up going forward, and just making sure that that it is not an option. This is one of the required assessments on the assessment calendar. There are some optional, but this one is not.
What I worry about when I look at that, because remember, some of these areas we've grown a lot. So were they kids who were lower that didn't, like, did you look at any of that, like similarities of populations that didn't test?
Dr. Madney.
Yeah, we didn't look at populations that didn't test, but what I looked at were the campuses that had a lower participation rate.
Okay.
And I share your concern that did that have an impact on outcomes? Because anytime you have a lower participation, we've talked about this with COVID, with STAR assessments, it could go either way. But we haven't looked at the individual student level yet.
Okay, thank you. Historically, and you spoke to this a little bit, Mr. House, historically we stagnate between middle of the year and end of the year. What strategies are y'all putting in place to make sure that there's sustained growth? Because we could meet our target potentially this year.
I think, one of the first things that we have to do is clean up the data, as you mentioned earlier, and make certain from an accountability standpoint that we have the most accurate assessment consistency in place, and making sure that, whether it's the system of great schools and what we're going to be bringing in, making sure that everybody does their part to have good data. That can't be a choice. It has to be an expectation, but it has to be also balanced with what you've heard a couple of trustees talk about in terms of too much testing.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Bird and I have talked on multiple occasions around what that needs to look like moving forward, and making sure that we're doing the right testing and not too much testing. So Dr. Bird, you want to share a little bit insight there?
And I also think that that teachers have to see the connection between this test and instruction. If they don't understand the why behind it, then we do see variations in administration. So I think that's the strategy for looking at our assessment program overall and helping our teachers understand. I mean, and the growth is obviously to the credit of the classroom teachers. So they're doing a lot of work, and we want the assessments to help inform them, not just be another thing they have to do. So when we look at assessment, we're going to be looking at that and getting input from teachers as well.
So I appreciate that understanding, but just to clarify my question, like what's happening in the classroom for the kids' education to make sure that we sustain, we've had this great growth between beginning of the year and middle of the year, to sustain that growth in learning through the end of the year. That's really what I was trying to understand.
Sure. I think that some of the things that Superintendent House spoke about before, high dosage tutoring for students that were behind, are helping to close those gaps. That is continuing. There are, they're just the implementation of the curriculum and staying in line with the scope and sequence is going to help. All of those things, PLC meetings that teachers have to discuss student performance, and I've visited schools where there's regular conversations about student data and making sure that they are continuing to close gaps. So I think it's those best practices that we see in the bright spots that Trustee Wade mentioned, that we try to replicate those kinds of things across in other schools.
Okay, Thank you. And then In the superintendent's response, I appreciate that the root cause, is kind of, it's COVID at this point, is all getting chalked up into that. I don't want to hear that next year, but my last question is, do any of these things in your response require board support?
I think the support that has to be focused on is what's in the strategic plan. We've put out, of course, 6 commitments. In those commitments, that entails many of the things that we've talked about today in terms of instructional materials, of professional development, high-quality curriculum, continuing the work that we're doing in terms of supports via ESSER. Those are the things that I think are going to be important, and in continuing the conversation around whether it be PUA or the idea of ensuring that we take a close look at adjustments in the PUA or alternative options for years to come.
And I just have a quick comment and a question. Just glad to hear that y'all are looking at the number of assessments we do. I absolutely believe in knowing where our children are, but I do think that our district has historically done quite a bit. And then just one question, can we also get a list of schools that are growing the students the most in this area?
Be glad to do so.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, Superintendent House and Dr. Matney and trustees for a great conversation. We will now conduct our hearing of the community so that speakers may be heard no later than... Thank you, I was just skipping.
I move
right
we
ahead.
accept the report. This.
We have a motion by Trustee Dygard and a second by Trustee Hernandez to accept the presentation. Any discussion? Please vote. Eight, 4, 0 against, 0 abstentions. We will now conduct our hearing of the community so that speakers may be heard no later than 7 p.m. in accordance with board policy. Only those who registered by noon yesterday may speak this evening. Copies of handout materials must have been provided to board services by noon yesterday. We have 18 registered speakers remaining this evening. Speakers are limited to 1 minute each. I'd like to remind speakers that when addressing the board, please stay on topic and refrain from naming individuals, especially students, as they are protected under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. However, naming your own child is permissible in the course of stating your concern. The board encourages and welcomes comments and input from our community, but we cannot respond to or deliberate on any subject that is not included on the posted agenda. That is, the board cannot deliberate or respond directly to a speaker in this format. While the board listens to concerns of a general nature, speakers should practice normal rules of decorum. Obscene language and profanity will not be tolerated, as this is a public meeting and our students are watching. Additionally, disruptions of the meeting will not be tolerated. We ask the audience to refrain from interrupting speakers while they present to the board during this portion of the meeting and to promptly end their remarks when the timer rings, indicating the expiration of their time. Speakers will generally be given 2 reminders of our public comment rules. If a speaker continues to violate the rules after these reminders, the speaker will be asked to leave the meeting. We will begin with registered speakers who signed up to speak virtually via Zoom. Comments are limited to 1 minute each, and each speaker's Zoom connection will be terminated at that time. Please remember that we must see you live with your camera on as you speak. For those Zoom speakers who are watching the meeting live on another device, be sure to mute the meeting audio when it is your time to speak. To avoid audio interference, turn on your camera and begin speaking. Ms. Trin, please identify and admit our speakers.
Our first speaker is Brenda Pytak. Brenda, please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Can you come sit here?
Speaker will be asked to leave the meeting. Will be.
Hello? We can hear you, Brenda, but please turn on your camera and you may begin.
Now?
Yes.
As a parent, I'm appalled that biological boys are allowed into the girls' locker room at my daughter's school. She's 12 years old and she's now having to undress in front of a biological boy. I don't care that parents believe their boy is a girl or that their girl is a boy. It doesn't work that way. If you have male parts, you go to the male restroom. If you have girl parts, you go to the girl restroom. It's not hard. It's not difficult. It's not confusing. It's not controversial. It's disgraceful that adults are going along with this. As a grown female, I would never feel comfortable going into a male restroom and seeing male genitalia. But we're asking children to do that. We're saying that you are a child and you can handle seeing that. There's something wrong. And what's going to happen when a 15-year-old girl goes into the male restroom at her school? You think those boys are going to think that she's a boy because she thinks she's a boy? It's insane.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Patrick, you may begin. Turn on your camera, please.
Okay, we'll move on. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Christopher Williams. Christopher, you have joined us via Zoom. Please turn on your camera and you may begin. Christopher, turn on your camera, unmute, and you may begin. Christopher, third attempt. Turn on your camera, unmute, and you may begin.
We'll move on to the next speaker.
Those are all the Zoom callers.
Thank you. At this point, next we will hear from speakers appearing live in our auditorium. We ask that you please speak directly into the microphone. The clock on the wall to your right on the podium will count down your time and will signal when your time is up. I ask that you please respect our procedures and the other speakers and end your remarks promptly when your time has expired. Will Gladys House L. please come to the podium? As I call the next three speakers' names, please take a seat on the front row. Candace Matthews, Dr. Candace Matthews, Bill Hepburn, Sister Mama Sonia. You may begin. Let's get your mic on. Is her mic on? Okay. Go ahead and start again. Go ahead and start again.
Ready? Okay. Peace. The constant 2-year turnover of principals at Gregory Lincoln is really bad for the students and their morale and connection to the administration there. It's a lack of community outreach. We need more community outreach into the Freedmanstown community from Gregory Lincoln. We're still awaiting responses from the trustee president on issues that we presented her when she first took office. We haven't heard anything despite reaching out to her. And lastly, there is no communication to us on the future plans for Gregory Lincoln. So it's like we're just out on the loop of what goes on in the school that our tax dollars support. So I'd appreciate it if the board would get some responses to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So noted. Thank you for coming up. Next, we will have Sister, I'm sorry, did I go too far, too fast? Bill Hepburn.
Good evening. My name is Bill Hepburn. I'm team leader HVAC North. Maintenance has not gotten a raise in 3 years, going on 3 years. I think we should get a 15% raise to cover the 3 years. We essentially keep the schools open. No AC, no electricity, no water, no kitchen. The school's closed down, and it's a major problem. I've never had that happen with any of my campuses, but it has happened in the past. We provide a safe and comfortable learning environment for the students. We had an HVAC tech leave this district, go to Humble ISD. He received a $22,000 raise to go and work there, a $3,000 raise for being there for 1 year, and two $500 bonuses for that year, and he'll get those bonuses every year. I'm a team leader for over 10 years. I run 2 departments. I don't make anything like that. So it's something we need to consider. Also, the window unit techs should be a pay grade 24. They're EPA certified. They work with HVAC tools just like a senior HVAC tech does. So it's something we need to do, and we need trucks to get.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you, sir. Sister Mama Sonia and Pamela Bublin next.
Love us. We hope you take care of us. We hope you really care about us. Someone asked me to sing the song, so I had to. What's the name? A name is very, very important. Turner Lockhart. Lockhart is now on the property of Turner. I went to both schools. We're asking you to please, there is still a motion from way back then to change it to Turner Lockhart. Please do that. As well as Delmar Stadium. Delmar was one of the most racist persons that sat where you all were sitting. He talked about us, he called us ends and everything else. Our children should not have to play under a name as such as someone by the name of Delmar. Will you please take it upon yourselves to change, because we wouldn't have a stadium called Hitler Stadium, would we? I don't think you'd like that. So it's the same thing. Please change it. Disrespect us? No, you won't. Love us? Yes, you will. I hope you really care about us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sonia, Sister Mama Sonia Esquire. Thank you.
Ditto. Pamela Bovelin. Oh, Dr. Bovelin.
The first one I haven't had, so I'm excited to be here, and I want to ditto everything Sister Mama Sonia said, as well as giving full consideration to what is going on in Bel Air. There's a lot of, we've always praised Bel Air for their high academic standard, but I don't hear a whole lot of discourse about the high racist standard. And I think something needs to be done. It's, the children do what they're taught. They don't just come up with this. And in our environment, we need to really look at, what is going on in terms of racism in HISD. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bovelin. Yaneth Martel, and then Michelle Lynette Williams. Oh, pardon me. Dr. Candace Matthews, will you come up? Pardon me.
Sorry for my tardiness. I had a press conference prior to coming in here. I'm Dr. Candace Matthews. I'm the statewide steering committee chair for the Rainbow Push Coalition under the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I am here in reference to the baseball coach over at Bel Air High School. Now, this is not a Democratic issue. This is not a Republican issue. This is a miscarriage in civil rights and also with discrimination. I am dependent on every last one of you board members, including you, Mr. Superintendent. I don't even know you, I just met you. I need you all to hold this man accountable. Racism does not need to exist in our schools, and it does not need to exist within our state, and our children should not be subject to it. You all are in position because we put you there. So we are expecting for you to hold this man and his assistant coach accountable. Because if not, I'm coming for every last one of your seats. Do I make myself clear? Thank you so much, and y'all have a good night. I got to go home to my chair. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. Janeth Martel, and then Michelle Lynette Williams.
Hi, good evening, HISD trustees and Superintendent House. I'm here to talk to you about bringing Montessori education to East End or East Houston. So in recent news, the Basis Academy and the City of Houston came together for a 10-year deal that is going to be opening 4 new Montessori schools for kids ages 3 to 5 years old in East End and other underserved areas. With the announcement from Basis Academy, I think it's a great start for us to have a conversation about what we can do in the East End as far as Montessori is concerned. I think it's a perfect time for us to take a look at what can be done with a school such as possibly Briscoe Elementary and see if we can convert that school into a Montessori program that would allow the kids that are at the Basis Academy to have a school to directly go into after that program. HISD has 2 great programs. My children actually have attended one of those programs at Baker Montessori and at Garden Oaks Montessori. I grew up.
Thank you, Ms. Martel. Michelle Williams?
Good morning. Good afternoon, evening. Long day. My name is Michelle Williams. I am the president of the Houston Education Association. Many of you all have already interacted with me via email. Tonight, I want to speak to you about the Student Code of Conduct. We can talk about academic gains, you can have all of your presentations, but until you protect the teacher's right to teach without interruptions, disruptions from disruptive students, nothing is ever going to change. This Student Code of Conduct is inadequate at best. It has not been revised. It still references iPods and MP3 players, don't even exist. So what I'm asking you all today is please revise, protect your teachers so that we can have some high quality educators, just like myself, to come to HISD and teach the students and meet these goals that y'all trying to set. Thank you.
Sam Smith, Larry McKenzie, James Pritchett.
Noon Board President, Trustees. First of all, I want to thank Trustee Daniels for answering my call on last week about the issues that's going on at Forest Middle School and North Forest High School. 2 cops is not working at North Forest High School. She needed more assistance and more cops on that campus. Forest Middle School have fights every day. The principal that need assistance, she's been reaching out, asking for assistance. Can you please give her some assistance? Board President, I need to have a conversation with you regarding the North Manor or Marshall Elementary School. So when you get time, can you please reach out to me so we can have a conversation? Thank you.
Larry McKenzie, James Pritchett, Wesakita Light.
Okay, this is dashiki Thursday, so I'll wear my dashiki, and I provided one to the superintendent so he can wear his dashiki on a Thursday. But I'm here for the Bel Air, Westbury, racism, and bullying. If you look at the school student code of conduct, then racism and bullying is a level 3 and level 4 offense. So if you need to get not only the students, but fire the coaches, reprimand the principal, because this has been going on for a long time. And I understand that you guys are trying to pass some type of budget where you can get a field built for Bel Air. You need to hold on to that money until we figure out why they need a field. And then you need to pay some money we always pay the money for the teachers of the best of the best of the best. But I work at secondary DAEP, and you don't understand that. We don't get a stipend for working there. And we have the best of the worst and the worst of the worst. And I would bet money that none of you could work there. And I invite.
Please refrain from clapping. You can use your hands in the air. James Pritchett, Wesakita Light, Jackie Anderson.
Push it. Oh, here we go. Okay, greetings, board.
Greetings, Mr. Superintendent. My name is James Pritchett. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Promise Community School, and I would like to thank you all for your service. Today, I wanted to come to you and as a peer, a colleague, and a friend. I stood here 2 years ago, and I talked about using certain approaches to balance your budget, and of course, we were in the news recently for the recent audit that came out. I'm a product of HISD as well as a parent, and I hope to have grandkids that graduate from this school district. So I'm proud of it, and I don't want you all to fail, because if you fail, the district fail. So my friendly advice is this: the devil is in the details. We criticize the budget, which is the plan, but however, we have to have that same criticism during the journey, meaning that if we don't understand Texas school business, please take the time and learn it. Understand your GL and ask those tough questions like you asked tonight about the budget. Why is this sitting there? Where is it going? And where is the movement of?
Wissaquita Light, Jackie Anderson, James Hayes.
Good afternoon, trustees. New Texas teachers and returning teachers are making less than they did 10 years ago with inflation factored in. But HISD has found $300 million after crying for years to the media about their catastrophic deficit. Now is the time to raise teachers' pay to offset inflation and make up for the lost decade of wages when public school employees have suffered. Now is the time for HISD to show dignity and respect to our teachers and staff. Now is the time to prove that you value and respect us. Now is the time for you to restore, rethink, retain the best. Put that respect on our checks. We're asking you to use the $300 million surplus to give employees a real pay raise that actually increases their take-home pay. Our public school employees deserve respect and for all that they do for our students. Our union is moving forward to demand that you respect us and prove it in our paychecks. We're asking you to restore dignity and respect to our schools. We're asking you to rethink which positions in HISD that directly impact student outcomes and how those employees should be compensated.
James Hayes, Brandy Ramos, Reverend F.N. Williams II.
Trustees and Superintendent House. The mission of the Houston Independent School District Police Department is to ensure an environment where students feel safe to learn, employees feel safe to work, and the community is confident in the safety of the district. The vision of the Houston Independent School District states that every child shall have equitable opportunities and equal access to an effective and personalized education in nurturing and providing a safe environment. It is imperative that the police department continue to evolve, but it is also equally as important that we have your unwavering support. To safeguard everyone's freedoms and liberties, the police department must have up-to-date technology, equipment, funding sources, and adequate personnel to sustain and protect district property, employees, and our most important asset, our scholars. It is my sincere hope and prayer that this governing board continues to support the men and women of the Houston ISD Police Department so that we can continue to provide safety, security, and support our stakeholders, employees, and scholars. Thank you. I yield my time.
Brandy Ramos, Reverend F.N. Williams II. Diedrich Carr.
Thank you so much to the superintendent of the board. I'm F.N. Williams II, president of the Partnership for School Improvement, which basically operates out of the Acres Home area with the clusters of schools there. I'm here to advocate, as it's already been discussed, for equity in all of our schools. I think the transformation school program that has been shared with us by our board rep, Ms. Daniels, it certainly would identify and move us forward in that direction. The schools that are impacted in District 2 that are in need, Ms. Daniels certainly has that information and that list. Understand Ms. Hernandez has 4 also in her district. The idea here is to level the playing field. And with all of the things that have been discussed here, I would hope that we would embrace that and go forward in this way. The increases of the finance will help us achieve that goal. Thank you.
Deidre Carr, Anita Daniels, Sandra Francis. Deidre Carr, Anita Daniels.
Good evening. My name is Anita Daniels, and I am a parent, a new parent to HISD, a new partner to HISD. I am also the founder of the Anita D. Designer Foundation. I am a partner. Once again, I want to say that. I am here to discuss Bel Air. We've only been in the school district, this HISD, for 2 years. 2 years. My son has been brutally beat. This is an issue. And for teachers, the administrators, to constantly, over and over and over, when I have warned them in black and white, emails, alerting them about what is happening to my son, nothing. On April 1st, my son was jumped on by 9 boys at Bel Air High School, pulled out of his classroom.
Thank you, Ms. Were you able to finish, Ms. Daniels? Were you able to finish?
No, I'm not finished.
We'll give you an additional minute. There was a motion. Thank you.
Dollars in COVID-19 supplies and PPEs distributed throughout this school district. And all I asked for was for protection and safety measures to be put in place. I have asked the administrators over and over and over, what do you have in place for my son to return to your school for safety measures? He was escorted out through a back way out of Bel Air High School a few days before this brutal attack happened. My son had only been there 3 weeks. He is at home, and he has been home since April 1st with no administrator talking to me. I spoke with the police department. They have told me they cannot discuss it with me.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. Sandra Francis?
The superintendent and the members of the board. I am a board member with the Stone's Throw Association, and we've been having some issues with the Westbury High School overflow. I have approached and spoken with the principal. I have approached and spoken with certain officers at the school. I've talked to Captain Chief Lopez. I've talked to somebody named Tron. I even went and spoke with the principal, and she just disregarded the problem and me as well. We've had to go, went before the city council. I've spoken with my councilwoman. I've spoken with the mayor and the council board of this issue. We've had to have signs installed in our neighborhood because we are getting belligerent threats from the parents and the students. If your children are getting out of school at 4:10, why are your officers leaving campus at 4 o'clock?
Thank you, Ms. Francis.
Thank you so much. So we go back to your campus. Thank you so much.
We are now ready to move on to J1, discussion of the redrawing of trustee district boundary lines and approval of related resolutions. General Counsel, sorry. General Counsel Alnita Hutchins-Taylor has some information to provide us. Ms. Hutchins-Taylor?
Thank you, President Cruz. This is regarding agenda item J1, discussion of the redrawing of trustee district boundary lines and approval of related resolutions. By law, public school districts with individual member districts are required to look at census data. In this case, the 2020 census data needs to be reviewed to make a determination of whether the boundary lines for Board of Trustee districts need to be rebalanced. For this process, the district has engaged the law firm of Bickerstaff, Heath, Delgado, and Acosta. With us today is attorney Sidney Falk that will present some information regarding the redrawing of those lines. For the benefit of the public, we want to make clear, however, that this is not redrawing attendance boundary lines for students. It is not affecting the school boundary lines for students. It is looking at redrawing the lines for the trustees that represent the 9 districts in HISD. With that, I turn it over to Mr. Falk.
Madam President, Board, pleasure to be with you here tonight. We are going to talk a little bit about redistricting. I'm going to describe for you the basics of the law that applies. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we propose, and then give you the punchline. We have, in the initial assessment, looked at your current trustee districts and put in the new census data. When your districts were drawn previously, 10 years ago, they were in population balance, but there has been growth in the decade, and the task is to look and see whether the districts are still properly balanced. There are 4 basic principles I want to talk to you about tonight. I'm going to name them first and then turn to them in a second. The thing that drives the redistricting standard and under federal law drives the need to redistrict is the so-called one person, one vote principle. It's really an equal population principle. Federal law requires that single member districts of legislative bodies, which you are one, be approximately equal in population. And so after every census, we look to see whether you are still in appropriate population balance. While we're doing that, there are a couple of legal principles that we have to pay attention to. In particular, we need to be aware of the requirements of Voting Rights Act Section 2. That's the non-discrimination section of the Voting Act, and I will describe Section 2's standards in a minute. In turn, while we are considering the Voting Act requirements, the Supreme Court, in a line of cases beginning in the 1990s called Shaw versus Reno, has said there is a limit to how much you can, in effect, pay attention to race as the dominant factor when you're drawing a district. And finally, I want to talk very briefly about Voting Rights Act Section 5, which does not apply this time around, but it has a useful standard for diagnostic purposes, and I'll describe that in a second. So, one person, one vote principle, the equal population principle, comes from the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, courts have interpreted it to require that single-member districts have about the same, approximately equal populations. You don't have to get exactly equal populations. There is some latitude. And over the last 40 or so years, courts have recognized that as long as you have, in comparing the most populous to the least populous of your districts, no more variation than about 10%, then you would be in satisfactory population balance. If you have greater than 10% deviation overall, you need to redraw. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. So the technique for figuring out exactly what that deviation is to define an ideal district size. We take the total population of the district and divide by the number of single-member districts, of trustee districts, so divide by 10. And that is the population, that gives you the population that would be exactly equal for all of the districts if they were all going to be the same. That's the target. As I said, you don't have to achieve the target perfectly, but we're going to look at that. So you define that ideal size and compare your most populous district to that ideal size and look how different it is. And you do the same thing with the least populous district. Let me give you an example. In this hypothetical example, there are 4 districts, and this particular jurisdiction has, fortunately, exactly 40,000 people. So when you divide 40,000 total population by the 4 single-member districts, the ideal population is exactly 10,000. That's the target, the size you want to get toward for each of the districts. In our example, in the 3rd column, you see the district total population. District A has got 11,000 people. We compare that to the ideal size. It's 1,000 larger than the ideal size, and 1,000 is 10% of the ideal size. So this district is 10% overpopulated, and its deviation is shown in that right-hand column. By the same token, we do the same thing for all the districts. District D is the most underpopulated, the least populous of the districts. It has 8,000 people, which is 2,000 people less than the ideal size, and that 2,000 is 20%. So it's 20% underpopulated. So we look at those two numbers, the 10% overpopulation for District A, the 20% under for District D, add them together, and that's a 30% total deviation. It's bigger than the 10% the courts recognize, and so this jurisdiction has to redistrict. Let's talk a little bit about the data that we're going to use. We all know the Census Bureau counts people.
Mr. Falk, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you for just a second. Trustees, there was a green folder on your desk with the slide deck in case you're wanting to follow along.
President Cruz, how long will the presentation be?
Can you give us an estimate of how long the presentation will be?
Another 10, 15 minutes?
Okay.
Less if you'd like to accelerate.
We've been here for quite some time. President Cruz, can we take a break? Oh, yes.
Actually, he does need to get back to us.
Oh, apologies. Okay. All right.
Okay, go ahead. So sorry for that interruption.
Okay, we know the census takes population data. What you typically don't know is that it also defines what is called census geography. In particular, it divides the entire country into little geographic units called census blocks. These are the smallest areas for which the census reports population and demographic data. And that data comes in two basic chunks: the total population, which is then broken down by various categories of race and Hispanic origin, and something called voting age population, or VAP, which is the head count of everybody that's 18 or over. So we have those data at the block level for all the census blocks that we're going to encounter in redrawing. In a city like Houston, a census block typically looks like a city block. If you get out into suburban areas, rural areas, the census blocks are often larger and irregularly shaped, sometimes not very populous either. And they are the smallest building blocks that are available to us for redrawing districts. In addition to the census blocks, there are things called voter tabulation districts, VTDs. And you can think of them really as very close to being county election precincts. For a district as large as HISD, one of the things we're going to suggest is that you draw with building blocks that are basically the VTDs instead of census blocks. For determining the equal population requirement, we're going to look at total population, but when we pay attention to any voting rights questions, we're going to look at voting age population. That's why we need to pay attention to it as well. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, as I mentioned, is the non-discrimination section. And it says you may not discriminate against a protected minority group on the basis of race, language, or minority status. There are two main ways that during redistricting you could violate Section 2. There are other ways, but these are the two most important. They are called cracking and packing. Cracking is sometimes also called fracturing. The idea of cracking is that you divide a geographic compact area of minority voters into pieces to fragment its voting power. So for instance, if it was possible to draw a majority Hispanic district and you broke that population into half so that neither of those halves constituted a majority in the two districts you put them in, that could violate Section 2. That's cracking. Packing is the opposite of that, and that is taking a situation where, for instance, you could draw two Hispanic districts, but you pack the population of Hispanic voters into one district as tightly as you can, and you don't get the second district. Both of those practices can, but don't always, violate Section 2. You have to view them in light of the fact that you're trying to balance the population. And sometimes, if you're underpopulated, got an underpopulated district, and you want to balance it, you have to add people. And it may be that you're not adding Hispanics to a Hispanic district. So we'll look at that. The 14th Amendment also gives rise to a series of court cases. Shaw versus Reno was the Supreme Court case in 1993 that limits the degree to which you can look at race as the predominant or most important factor when you're considering drawing a plan or a district. And the court says it's not always illegal to do that, but we have to draw a line. And in particular, the standard is, are you considering race to satisfy what the lawyers call a compelling governmental interest, which is a fancy way of saying a governmental interest that's important and legitimate. If you are, you're only supposed to consider race and act on race as a factor to the degree you need to solve the thing you're trying to do, the compelling governmental interest. Here's an example of what not to do. This is a district drawn by the North Carolina legislature in 1992. This is the Shaw versus Reno test case. The legislature adopted this yellow district to be a majority African-American district, followed an interstate virtually across the state, and grabbed African-American communities on either side of the interstate to try to build this majority district. It got challenged in court, ended up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, too much. This is considering race far too much. Closer to home, 1992. Well, the case was 1993. Closer to home, about the same time, the Texas legislature, redistricting in the state's congressional districts in the Houston area, drew the map in the upper left. The red district is intended to be, and was, a majority African-American district. The light green district that surrounds it was intended to be and was a majority Hispanic district. It got challenged in court, and following the Shaw versus Reno analysis, was struck down. The legislature did not draw another acceptable plan, so the court drew the plan in the bottom right. And again, the red district was intended to be and was a majority Hispanic district. The little light green district was a majority African American district, only a couple of percentage points less strong than the districts the legislature had drawn. But the lesson is you cannot have this level of gerrymandering on a race basis. So, well, the lesson is that the court drew something that was narrowly tailored to create the majority districts that the Voting Rights Act Section 2 said needed to be produced, but didn't go beyond the necessity. So the lesson from Shaw is you usually can't elevate race to the predominant factor you're considering, but you can be aware of race, and in fact you have to be, to satisfy Section 2 and not violate Section 2. So that part's okay, and the courts have said so. But if you're going to consider to satisfy Section 2, if you're going to consider race, you do only what's necessary to solve the Section 2 problem or prevent the Section 2 violation. You don't go overboard. And bizarrely shaped districts aren't themselves, in and of themselves, illegal. You see them in political gerrymandering all the time. But if they're race-based, they typically will violate Section 2. All right, Section 5 of the Act, which does not apply this time around, previously required what was called pre-clearance. Whenever you made a change to any voting practice, standard, or procedure, anything, move a polling location, change your polling hours, change the form of a ballot, you had to get it pre-approved before you could do it. The usual way of getting that pre-clearance was to go to the Department of Justice, long, big application for pre-clearance, telling them why you were making the change and what you were changing from and all that kind of stuff. We did one for the city of Houston once that was 36 boxes of materials. They got messy. And they would review it all and pre-clear you or not. The standard they used was similar to, but not the same as, the standard for Section 2 discrimination determinations. It was a little simpler in concept, and it was called retrogression. Basic idea was, is the new thing you're doing, in this case, the new plan you're drawing, going to make the minority groups better off or less well off? And if it's less well off, it was retrogression. That's a very useful standard for looking at a plan that you're considering and getting a real quick red flag if there is a retrogression. If you weaken a district, a Hispanic or an African American district, more than you need to, that raises a red flag and it suggests you need to look very carefully at what you're doing and maybe make some changes. So it's a diagnostic tool, but we do not have to get pre-clearance. We're going to ask you in the beginning of the process to adopt what we call redistricting criteria, and they are some practical things and a couple of legal things. The two legal things are basically follow the law, the ones that I've already described. So the little box in the center says adopt districts of relatively equal size. That's the 10% rule. The box right below it says narrowly tailor your plan to comply with the Voting Rights Act. Pay attention to race, but don't overdo it, and pay attention to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The rest of them are relatively practical. Use identifiable boundaries. Use streets and roads and bayous. Don't use maps that have lines across the middle of fields. To the extent feasible, maintain communities of interest in neighborhoods. Don't split them up if you don't really need to. Sometimes you have to because you've got to move population around. You got to move your lines, but you can try to be careful about doing that. To the extent that it's feasible, use whole voting precincts, whole election precincts, if it's possible. The reason for that is Every time one of your boundary lines splits a county election precinct, they have to have a different ballot on each side of that split. It costs money and takes time, and it's hard. And you are paying for them to run that election. If you have the ability to use VTDs or voting precincts as the building blocks, that's a preferable way to do it. Base your districts on your existing plan. There's no need to completely wipe the slate clean and draw from scratch. And in fact, it's undesirable in some respects to do that because the constituents in given districts have a reasonable expectation that your districts are going to sort of look kind of the same to the degree they can. Some continuity. Draw districts that are compact and contiguous. Contiguous means connected. Can't have a piece of District 10 on the east side and a piece of District 10 on the west side. It's okay, finally, to keep incumbents, or at least be aware of where incumbents live and try to keep them in their districts. Now, that's not your right that the courts recognize. That's the voters' right to have some continuity in the representation that they've elected. So all of these factors are things that courts over time have recognized as legitimate things to take into account. One other thing we're going to ask you to adopt at the beginning, somewhere in the beginning of the process, are what we call guidelines for public participation. And they are all really common sense. If the member of the public at a hearing or submitting a written comment is going to do that, they need to identify themselves and give you contact information so that you can follow up if you need to. If somebody is going to actually propose a specific redistricting plan, they need to give you a plan that redistricts the whole of HISD, not just their particular district, because when you are putting together a redistricting plan, all of those things like a jigsaw puzzle have to fit together. There are ripple effects. If you do something to District 2, it's going to have a ripple effect that may go all the way around to District 6. You need to see the whole thing. They need to give you the data of the kind that I'm going to show you in the table of populations in each of their districts, which means they need to be using census data. We need to be able to reproduce their plan when they submit it so we can look at it. So the overall process that we're talking about is the initial assessment tonight, adopting the plan, districting criteria and guidelines, and the next step is the development of a new plan. We will have the ability to have live drawing sessions with our GIS people back in Austin connecting through the internet and showing you a map on the screen of your districts and the ability to move your district lines around right now in real time and watch the demographics, the population and demographics in each district change. The software keeps track of all that stuff, and there's a table right below the map that you can immediately see the effect of moving a line. So we can do live drawing. In aid of that, because it's sometimes hard to just say, okay, you're out of balance, what do you want to do? We will bring you a couple of example plans to get you thinking about what you may want to do, maybe thinking about what you might not want to do. We might accidentally do something you don't think is good, but it'll give you a sense of the magnitude of the changes you need to make and the kinds of options you have in making them. At some point in this process, you will get to the point where even though you're not quite ready to vote yes on the plan, you're all nodding your head and kind of comfortable with this. And it's time then to get public input. Several ways to do that. You can have a public comment period or periods where you ask for written comments. More commonly, we would have a public hearing or a series of public hearings where the public can come review the plan and make comments just like they've done tonight. We will take the input that we get, talk with you about it, and recognize the things that you think are important to change in the plan that you have developed or plans that you've proposed. Make those changes, and finally you'll adopt a final plan. There are a couple of things that you need to be thinking about for adoption. mainly the timing for the effective date for the new plan. You can make it effective on the same date that you adopt the plan, or you can make it effective, for instance, sometime in the future when the new board terms begin. If you make it effective immediately, your lines change immediately. And that can sometimes cause some confusion. If you wait and make it effective when the new board terms begin, then you serve out your terms, you serve out the first piece of your terms under the existing districts, and then they change when the first change to the board comes into effect. You can pick any time in between. We just need to think about it. So schedule, roughly speaking, looks like this. We have to pick a couple of dates for drawing sessions, some dates for the public hearings that you identify you want to have, some dates for additional drawing session or sessions following the public comment period, and final adoption. And we will work out all those dates once you have decided how many of each of these things you want to do, how many public hearings and how you'd like to spread them out and when you want them to occur. Okay, here's the punchline part. This is the initial assessment data where we've taken the new census data and put it into your existing districts to see how far out of balance you are. You know you've grown like crazy over the decade. And so here's the punchline. These are your current districts. And this is the table, if it will click, that says you have to redistrict. Look in the very lower left part where it says overall deviation, 25.8%. So your most populous district and your least populous district differ by 25%, over 25% compared to the ideal size. That's bigger than the court's 10% allowance. You need to redraw. I don't think anybody's surprised. So let's look at the districts. The left-hand column identifies the trustee district. The next column, labeled persons, gives the actual census head count for the district. The ideal size, of course, is the same for all the districts, and that's the total population divided by 10. By 9. The deviation of each of these districts is shown in the next column. That's really the critical column. What we did was exactly what I explained. We looked at the total headcount population compared to the ideal size, looked at the difference, expressed that difference as a percentage departure from the ideal size, and calculate the total deviation. District 7 is the most overpopulated at 11.17% over. District 4 is close at 9.69% over. And District 3 is the least populated at 14.63% underpopulated. So what we do to get the 25.8% total is add the deviation for District 7 to the deviation for District 3, add those 11.17 and 14.63 together, and that's how that deviation is derived. Okay. Well, the task will be, therefore, to move boundaries in a way that puts District 3, puts population into District 3, and actually a fair amount, and takes population from Districts 4 and 7. Other districts may get affected when you actually are doing the redrawing, depending on what you want to do, but it may be possible to do the redistricting in a way that doesn't affect many of the other districts. You can think of the drawing exercise as trying to get everybody within a plus or minus 5%. Now, you don't actually have to do that. You could have one of the districts at plus 6% and another district, the least populated district, at minus 3.99%, so that you're less than 10% overall. It's the total overall deviation that matters but a good way of thinking about how to get there is to have everybody be plus or minus 5%. Okay. We also have a table that shows comparable data for the districts for voting age population alone. And this is important because it is voting age population that you look at when you're deciding whether you have a Section 2 issue to deal with. So for instance, District 3 is 75.5% Hispanic, definitely a majority voting age Hispanic district. And when you redistrict, you want to be conscious of not unnecessarily reducing that Hispanic strength beyond what you need to do to get into population balance, for example. By the same token, if you look at the non-Hispanic black percentage column, you'll see there are several very strong, near majority African American districts. And we're going to want to be sensitive not to dilute the African American strength in those districts to the degree we can avoid it. So that's it in a nutshell. You have to redraw, and we have to pay attention to a whole bunch of variables at the same time. But if you say to yourself right now, it's going to be fun, I'm going to enjoy this, then you'll get off on the right foot. And I will emphasize something that Ms. Hutchins-Taylor said at the outset. It's important that everybody in the public understand. Redrawing these lines does not affect anything else in the district's services. It doesn't affect school attendance zones. It doesn't affect anything else. It is just the trustee districts that are being changed.
Mr. Falk, thank you so much for this very important information. And I know trustees have a few questions, so please indicate in the queue. We'll do 2 rounds of 2 minutes. Trustee Guidry.
Thank you so much for this presentation. And I know this has to do with voting, and I know that it not really the districts, but here is my issue. I only have 2 middle schools in my district. I'm not affected. I'm District 9. So I'm not one of the 4 and probably not close to one of the 4. But would you consider if I bring you a presentation that draws in another middle school? I'm the only one with 2 middle schools, y'all. The rest of you all have 4 and 5. And so I'm looking for a feeder of another middle school. And if I bring you a presentation, would you consider it, sir? Do all of that.
The short answer to your question is you guys can consider drawing any plan you want as long as it satisfies the equal population and the voting standards. If you want to pay attention to where high schools are or middle schools, that's fine. It will always be some kind of a balance of, can we get that 3rd one in there without doing some danger to some voting rights aspect? It's always going to be a balancing, but yes, you can pay attention to other things.
The other option, of course, would be Superintendent House for you to build me another middle school within District 9, and also those schools that need to be rebuilt. Thank you.
No other.
You did a great job, thank you.
Well, it's an advantage to do it this late at night.
I know, thank you, and I know it's been a long day for you. I do have a question, because I know you're looking for guidance on these dates. Is that something that you want us to email you on? I can follow up with Ms. Hutchins-Taylor.
I guess my thought was,
or you would come to our next meeting?
We need an overall, I need an overall sense of how long you want the whole process to take.
Okay.
And overall sense of how many public hearings you have in mind, because that may, from a calendar point of view, take a while. And once we've gotten to that point, my thought is I will get with Ms. Hutchins-Taylor and try to work out a list of suggested dates for you guys to react to. We have a lot of time, fortunately, since your next election is a year and a half off.
And I think we had discussed earlier today, having it done by the end of the year. And I know some trustees, when you had proposed doing the drawing sessions before the summer, and that way folks in the community have time to look at it, think it over, and then we would start our public hearings as soon as, we're back in session for school in the fall. And, we have set meeting dates already, I think just attaching on, if that makes sense to y'all, if we already have agenda review, maybe coming earlier that day and having Mr. Falk come, or the day of
We
hearings.
can have this done by the end of the year. We can either do one meeting a month from now until December, or we can knock them all. We meet 3 times a month, first, second, third Thursday of the month, so.
We have to do September, August, September, October, November, December. After we come back from summer.
That sounds good to me. Yep, perfect.
So, Mr. Falk, I'll get with Ms. Hutchins-Taylor and we'll give you the clear dates so that you can be here for that. We really appreciate your time and drive safely.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Madam
Thank you.
President, there are 2 resolutions
yes.
that are posted, and if it's the pleasure of the board, you can vote on each of those resolutions tonight. Mr. Falk,
Yes.
you gave them an overview in your presentation. Do you want to go one more time, just very briefly, what each of those resolutions is about?
We've got it, thank you. I'm ready to move. Can I move to vote on them?
Second, Hernandez.
Thank you.
Can you indicate which resolution you're voting on first?
So there's
read the title.
guidelines for persons submitting specific redistricting proposals and providing comments. And then the second one is resolution adopting criteria for use in 2022 redistricting process.
So entertain a motion. My suggestion would be to entertain a motion on the first one and a second and a vote, and then entertain a motion on the second.
I move that we put resolution number 1 to a vote. Guidelines for persons submitting specific redistricting proposals and providing comments. Thank you.
Do I have a second?
Second, Hernandez.
I have a motion by trustee Santos and a second by trustee Hernandez. Any discussion? Please vote. Nine, 4, 0 against, 0 abstentions.
I move that we have a resolution adopting criteria for use in 2022 redistricting process.
Second?
Wade, second.
We have a motion by trustee Santos and a second by trustee Wade. Any discussion?
Nope.
Please vote. Oh. 9, 4, 0 against, 0 abstentions. There's 3 more things, yeah. We are now ready to consider the superintendent's agenda items.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Falk. For the record, let it be reflected that Agenda B1 has been revised. One of its attachments is new and one has been revised. The attachment to I1 has been revised and the attachment to J1 has been revised and its attachments are new. Board policy requires trustees to excuse themselves and abstain from all discussion and votes pertaining to contracts that might involve a conflict of interest. As defined in Board Policy BBFA Local, a conflict of interest is any circumstance that could cast doubt on a trustee's ability to act with total objectivity with regards to the district's interest. We will now consider items held for abstention and/or discussion. Each month, all action items begin on the consent agenda. If a trustee would like an item held from consent, they need to notify Sylvia Trin by 8 a.m. on the Monday prior to the voting meeting. Trustees, as a reminder, everyone had an opportunity prior to this meeting to submit additional questions after agenda review to the administration. The Q&A document has been updated to reflect the additional questions. The updated Q&A was sent to all trustees via email, is in your SharePoint under April board meeting documents, and has been posted on the district's website. The following item is being held from the consent agenda at the request of trustee Wade. F1, adoption of resolution to convene local school health advisory council for the purpose of making recommendations regarding curriculum materials for the school district's human sexuality instruction and instruction on the prevention of child abuse, family violence, dating violence, and sex trafficking. We will do one round of 1 minute per trustee. If an additional round is desired, you know the rule. May I have a motion? Yes.
So moved.
Thanks, you guys, for sticking through this. Do I have a motion?
So move, Santos.
Do I have a second? I have a motion by trustee Santos and a second by trustee Dygard. Are there any comments or questions?
I just
Trustee
don't,
Wade.
the reason it was pulled from consent is that I just want the public to have full notice that the committee will reconvene. The members on the committee will be posted, and the meetings have public input. This is a highly important subject for all students and families. My question on the information is, it says stated that last meeting was March 3rd, 2022, and April 7th, 2022, but we have not made the vote to reconvene the committee. Is that correct?
Dr. Bird, if you don't mind sharing the kind of next steps here. So the district, excuse me, the district SHAC meets on a monthly basis. This particular vote is to convene the committee for this particular reason.
Right, but so this is not the committee, the one that you spoken of on the Q&A document, it's at page 7?
So, yeah, so the committee is appointed by you guys, but this particular subcommittee is appointed by the chair of the,
Okay,
that
thank
has
you.
not been convened yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please vote. This is item F1 again. Yes, to adopt the resolution for the subcommittee, is my understanding. 9-4-0 against, 0 abstentions. I move to move item B1 from the consent agenda. That was the self-evaluation that we did in earlier today.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Cruz and a second by trustee Santos. Any discussion? Just wanted to say, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and please vote. Yes, but I didn't realize, but thank you, trustee Guidry, yes. 8-4-1 against, 0 abstentions. So I move that the board approve and accept the first quarter quarterly progress tracker scores as discussed and presented in closed session effective April 15th, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Cruz and a second by trustee Santos. Any discussion? Just want to say great work, colleagues, today on the self-evaluation. Of course, I'm super excited because it's the first one we've done in quite some time, and it will serve as our baseline and I think give us some guidance from here on out, and really excited about the continuous improvement of us as a board. Please vote. Oh, sorry, trustee Dygard.
Great job. Can we please have this posted? Great job, and can we please have this publicly posted online so the public can see and keep track of our progress? Thank you.
Great job, thank you.
That'd be a great idea. Please vote.
One thing too.
Oh,
Can
sir.
we look at having it refined to coincide with those questions that we talked about in the future?
Yes,
Not right now.
okay.
Danny, vámonos.
9-4-0 against, 0 abstentions.
I just want to make sure it's part of the record that I'm requesting that it's more refined to coincide with the evaluation. I think that it's too broad. So I just wanted to have that be part of the record, if we can probably make it bullets as opposed to so much information.
So you're saying just break it down?
Break it down and
Okay.
make it, and yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And have it coincide with each one of the, thank you.
Metrics.
I think she was,
Yeah, I want to make it refined. This is just too broad.
yeah, so that's
don't
the
get to
instrument,
change
yeah, that's the Lone Star governance instrument. So we can't change it. I mean, we could break it down and make it more palatable. but-
Okay, and that's fine, whatever it takes to break it down, because if not, I'm gonna be along with Santos, because I think that it needs to be more defined and broke down for each one of our tracking mechanisms.
Okay, we can
Is what I'm
definitely
saying.
continue that.
Okay.
let's see, where are we? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular monthly board meeting held on March 10th, 2022?
So move, Santos.
Second, Hernandez.
We have a motion by trustee Santos and a second by trustee Hernandez. Any discussion? Please vote.
Ready?
Vote.
9-4, 0 against, 0 abstentions. We are now ready to consider items discussed in executive session. Are there any motions?
We got it.
I move that the board authorize the district to settle the matter regarding Propel Financial Services eminent domain order of foreclosure concerning 5525 Gasmer Drive, Houston, Texas 77035, on the terms discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please vote.
Come on, Santos.
9-4, 0 against, 0 abstentions.
I move that the board authorize the district to settle the matter of Alex Curtis Jr. versus HISD in the District Court, Harris County, Texas, 190th Judicial District Court, cause number 2019-21692, on the terms discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please vote. Nine, 4, 0 against, 0 abstentions.
I move that the board authorize the district to settle the matter of Floyd Davis versus Earl Smith Richard and HISD et al. In the District Court, Harris County, Texas, 133rd Judicial District Court, cause number 2019-51480, on the terms discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please vote. 8-4, 0 against, 1 abstention.
I move that the board authorize the district to settle the matter of Raymond Freeman et al. Versus HISD in the District Court, Harris County, Texas, 11th Judicial District Court, cause number 2020-78459, on the terms discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please vote. 8-4, 0 against, 1 abstention.
I move that the board authorize the district to settle the matter of Angela Jobert versus HISD in the District Court, Harris County, Texas, 269th Judicial District Court, cause number 2016-30814, on the terms discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please vote. 8-4, 0 against, 1 abstention.
I move that the board authorize the district to settle the matter of the request for TEA special education mediation regarding SOMRD TEA mediation docket number 050DM. Okay, that I withdraw that. I move that the board approve closed session personnel agenda item number 7 as discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please. 8-4, 0 against, 1 abstention.
I move that the board approve a finding of no good cause for educators to resign or abandon employment contracts without district consent under Section 21.105C, 21.160C, or 21.210C of the Texas Education Code as discussed in closed session, and authorize the superintendent or his designee to submit a written complaint to SBEC to impose sanctions as discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
Second, Santos.
We have a motion by trustee Guidry and a second by trustee Santos. Please. 8 for, 1 against, 0 abstentions.
I move that the board approve the balance of the closed session personnel agenda, including specifically that the board approve proposed terminations of continuing term and probationary contracts, approve end of term, terminations of probationary contracts, that the board approve proposed non-renewals of term contracts, that the board approve issuance of fourth-year probationary contracts, and that the board authorize the superintendent or his designee to provide notice of same, that the board approve separation and release agreements, that the board approve withdrawals of contract recommendations, and that the board approve issuance of final orders on contract terminations and renewals as discussed in closed session effective April 15, 2022.
We have a motion by Trustee Guidry and a second by Trustee Santos. Please vote. 9 for, 0 against, 0 abstentions. Are there any other motions? We are now ready to consider the balance of today's agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the balance of today's agenda by consensus?
So moved.
Second, Guidry.
We have a motion by Trustee Hernandez and a second by Trustee Guidry. Please vote. 9 for, 0 against, 0 abstentions. Okay, we're almost there. Mr. Superintendent, do you have any reports for us at this time?
I do have just about 3 minutes worth of information that I'd like to share with the board. The first really has to do with several of our community members that were here today to speak in reference to library books. What I wanted to do was just to take 30 seconds and make sure that our community understands on record that there's a process that if there is a book that anyone has a concern with, they can actually bring that book before their school's a particular committee. Dr. Bird, do you mind sharing just a 25-second snippet and Sure. any insight that you have in reference to this? Sure. So there is a process. If a citizen has a complaint about an instructional material, they submit a form to their school principal. We then form a committee to reconsider that material. Just FYI, to date, since 2017, we've had 0 official challenges. But we want to encourage those that, number one, we have a process and to go through the process. The second item that I wanted to make sure that you all are aware, as I indicated earlier, we went ahead and released allocations since we've been here on the dais. So that has happened. That will allow us to move forward and do some of the work that we know is going to be extremely important. And that kind of leads me to my last item, which is one of the most critical pillars, of course, of the strategic plan is our commitment to cultivate the world-class talent that we know we have to have at all levels in the school district. To date, we've begun to execute on this particular commitment through several different actions, including the proposal of comprehensive compensation package that you all have heard about, stipends for teachers in critical shortage areas, including a $2,000 stipend for math, science, and career tech teachers, as well as a $5,000 stipend for special education, ESL, and bilingual education teachers. And finally, opportunities for additional pay for teachers with track records of improving student achievement to service, especially in our transformation cohort. These recruitment and retention stipends could increase an individual salary up to $10,000. Today, I'm extremely excited to announce another program aligned to this particular commitment, which is called Commit HISD Teacher Retention Program. In addition to all of the additional stipends and compensation opportunities I just shared, Commit HISD provides an extra $5,000 between June of 2022 and June of 24 to each teacher who commits this spring to teach in HISD for the next 3 years. We're asking all teachers to complete the Office of Talent's Intent to Return form, which can be submitted online by the deadline of May 6th. Within this form, you can declare your intent to participate and commit HISD. We know that our teachers are the core of ensuring the high-quality teaching and learning happens in our classrooms on a daily basis, so we see it and commit to HISD program not only as an opportunity to reward those individuals willing to commit to our students for the next 3 years, but an opportunity to move one step closer to providing our teachers with the salary that is commensurate with the value that they bring to students and our families on a daily basis. Madam President, that is all that I have.
Thank you so much, Superintendent House. Trustees, we are now ready to hear reports and comments from board members. Please limit your time to 1 minute per trustee. Trustee Hernandez, we'll start at your end.
Buenas noches, todos. Thank you for being here. Good night.
I want to say again thank you to my colleagues who came early from the Houston Ministries Against Crime, Reverend F.N. Williams II, and Pastor Gerald Shanks were here. And I'd like to say happy Good Friday, happy Easter, and happy Resurrection Day to everyone.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you. I am so glad that so many people attended tonight and engaged. It was very refreshing to see that. And I'd like to say to the family of Deputy Darren Elmadaris and Constable number 7 Jennifer Chavis, who were both lost in the line of duty the last 2 weeks. Prayers for their family, condolences, and happy Easter to everyone.
Trustee Guidry.
I'd just like to say happy Easter, happy and safe Easter to everyone. And I look forward to my community meeting, which will be on April 23rd at Windsor Village Elementary at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Please, please join us and hear more about the initiatives going on here at HISD. Thank you and good night.
Thank you to everyone tonight. Thank you for our community and for all the staff who stays and helps us out. Thank you very much. I want to tell you that we had a wonderful visit to Sinclair and to Lamar. I enjoyed my meeting at Love Elementary. What an amazing library at Love Elementary. And I enjoyed being there with Trustee Santos. Learned a lot about the parents and the school and the community. I wish everyone a happy Easter, starting tomorrow with a Good Friday and also with Passover. Thank you. Good night.
I wanted to salute the volunteers in public schools that we are honoring them on their celebration on next Friday. I also want to say congratulations to those scholars. We celebrated the valedictorians and salutatorians on past Tuesday. I want to say happy Easter, and because we don't get to speak but once a month, I also want to say happy Mother's Day. We won't get to speak until after. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, trustees. Just want to say thank you to the students that spoke today and really the ones that come and speak at any time. I admire their courage and the time that they take to come and speak to us since this is why we're here. Also want to recognize board services for all the work that they do behind the scenes, and want to recognize particularly Ms. Jones, who will be leaving the team. She's been leading the team for at least the last 2 years since I've been here, and I know before that she's done a remarkable job and she will be missed. So just want to thank you and shout her out publicly. La próxima reunión de la mesa directiva será el 12 de mayo y la reunión de revisar la agenda será el 5 de mayo. We look forward to seeing you at our next regular board meeting on May 12th, 2022. Agenda review for that meeting will be held on May 5th, 2022. There being no further business, this meeting is officially adjourned at 8:46 p.m. Buenas noches.